They say an Alpha King never kneels, that he'd burn the world before letting anyone see him bleed. But I watched Darius Vane, the most feared ruler in 7 territories, drop to his knees in front of a woman who wasn't his queen, not for politics, not for strategy, for something far more dangerous. And when Alira found out, the kingdom didn't just crack, it detonated. This is the story of a vow that couldn't be broken, a betrayal that couldn't be forgiven, and a queen who refused to stay down. Stick around till the end because this gets darker than you think. And hey, if you're watching from your city right now, drop it in the comments and smash that like button. Let's build this tribe together. But The throne room of Blackridge Keep smelled like old stone and wolfsbane. Elira Thorne stood at the eastern window, watching the first light cut through the mountain peaks, her fingers pressed against the cold glass. She hadn't slept. Again. 3 nights now, and the exhaustion sat heavy behind her eyes. But sleep meant dreams, and dreams meant seeing his face the way it used to be, before the distance, before the silence that crept between them like frost. Behind her, the heavy oak doors groaned open. She didn't turn. She knew his footsteps, the deliberate weight of each boot against stone, the way he always paused just inside the threshold, as if checking the room for threats even in his own castle. Darius, her husband, her king, her alpha, the man who promised her everything. "You're up early," he said. His voice was rough, scraped raw from whatever late meeting had kept him away until dawn. Again, Alira kept her gaze on the mountains. "So are you. Or maybe you never came to bed at all." Silence. The kind that used to be comfortable between them, back when they could communicate in glances and half-sentences. Now it just felt hollow. "There were matters to attend to," Darius said finally. "Border disputes. The northern clans are restless again." She turned then and caught the flicker in his eyes, the tell he thought he'd buried. Darius Vane, who could stare down rebel warlords without blinking, couldn't quite meet her gaze. "Border disputes," Alira repeated slowly. "At 3 in the morning, in the West Wing." The West Wing where the guest quarters were. Where Serena Vale had been staying for the past 2 weeks, ever since she'd arrived with her entourage of silk-dressed attendants and honeyed words about strengthening alliances with the southern territories. Darius's jaw tightened. "You don't trust me." It wasn't a question. It was an accusation, and the unfairness of it made something hot and sharp twist in Alira's chest. "I trusted you with everything," she said, her voice dropping low, the way it did when she was fighting to keep herself together. "I gave you my loyalty when everyone said I was a fool for binding myself to a king with more enemies than allies. I stood beside you when half the kingdom thought a woman from the outer villages had no business wearing a crown. I believed every word you said, and you still should. Then tell me I'm wrong. Tell me there's nothing happening with her." Darius moved closer, and for a moment she thought he might actually do it, might actually give her the reassurance she was desperate for. But instead, he reached out and gripped her shoulders, his hands too firm, too controlled. "You're my Luna, Alira. That hasn't changed. That will never change." It was the wrong answer. It was an answer that said everything by saying nothing at all. She stepped back out of his grip. Her wolf stirred beneath her skin, agitated, sensing the fracture in the bond that should have been unbreakable. "I need air," she said. "Alira." She was already moving toward the door, her spine straight, her head high, every inch the queen she'd fought to become. But inside she was cracking. Inside she was drowning. The courtyard was empty except for the guards stationed at the gate, and they knew better than to acknowledge her when she was like this, chin set, eyes forward, radiating the kind of tension that meant someone was about to bleed if they said the wrong thing. She made it to the training grounds before the trembling started. Her hand shook as she stripped off her formal jacket and grabbed one of the practice swords from the rack. The weight of it felt good. Real. Something she could control when everything else was slipping through her fingers like smoke. Alira began to move through the combat form she drilled into muscle memory years ago, back when she was nobody, back when survival meant being faster and meaner than everyone else in the pack. The sword cut through the air with a whistle, and she let herself fall into the rhythm, strike, pivot, block, strike, until her shoulders burned and sweat dripped down her spine. "Impressive form," a voice said from behind her. "Though you're telegraphing your left cross, Illyra spun, sword raised, and found Kael Theron leaning against the weapons rack, with his arms crossed, and that insufferable smirk on his scarred face. Her beta. Her oldest friend. The one person in this entire cursed castle who'd known her before she was Luna, before she was anything except a half-starved girl with more rage than sense. "Don't start," she warned. Kael pushed off the rack and stepped into the ring, grabbing a sword for himself. "Wouldn't dream of it. Just thought you might want a real opponent instead of beating up the air." She should have told him to leave, should have held on to her pride and her pain and kept it locked down where no one could see. But this was Kael. He'd pulled her out of a frozen river once when she was 12, and stupid enough to think she could cross it alone. He'd taught her how to fight, how to lead, how to survive in a world that wanted to crush anyone who didn't have power or bloodline to protect them. He'd never lied to her, not once. They circled each other, and then Kael lunged. Illyra blocked, twisted, came back with a strike that he barely deflected. They moved together like a dance they'd performed 1,000 times, and for a few minutes she could almost forget everything else. Until Kael spoke again. "You know the whole castle is talking, right?" Illyra's next strike came harder than it should have, and Kael had to step back to avoid getting his ribs cracked. "I don't care what they're saying," she bit out. "You should. Because what they're saying is that the king's keeping company with Lady Serena. Late nights, closed doors. The kind of company that makes people wonder if the Luna still has her king's heart or if someone else has claimed it." The sword dropped from Illyra's hand. She stood there, breathing hard, her chest tight with something that felt too much like panic. "He made a vow," she said, and hated how small her voice sounded. "In front of the ancestors, in front of the entire pack. Absolute loyalty of heart and body. He can't break that. He won't." Kael's expression softened, and that was somehow worse than his usual brutal honesty. "Lyra, men break vows every day, even kings, especially kings. Not him, not Darius. Then prove me wrong. Confront him. Demand the truth. Because right now, you're standing here trying to convince yourself of something everyone else has already stopped believing." The words hit like a physical blow, and Illyra had to lock her knees to keep from staggering. She wanted to scream at him, to tell him he was wrong, that he didn't understand what she and Darius had built together. But the truth was sitting there between them like a third person in the ring, ugly and undeniable. She didn't know anymore. Didn't know if the bond she'd trusted was real or if she'd been fooling herself from the beginning. Mat. That night, there was a formal dinner in the Great Hall. Illyra dressed carefully, choosing the deep crimson gown that Darius had once said made her look like a warrior queen, like someone who could command armies with a glance. She painted her lips the same shade, lined her eyes with kohl until they were sharp enough to cut, and fixed her hair in an elaborate braid that took her handmaid 20 minutes to complete. She looked like power, like control, like everything a Luna should be. Inside, she was screaming. The hall was already full when she arrived, packed with nobles and visiting dignitaries, all of them dressed in their finest, all of them trying not to stare at her too obviously while whispering behind their wine glasses. She could feel their eyes tracking her as she moved through the crowd, could practically hear their thoughts. Poor Luna. Doesn't she know? Hasn't she heard? Darius was at the head table, and Serena Vale was seated 2 chairs away from him, close enough to lean over and murmur something that made him laugh. The sound of it cut through Illyra like a blade. She'd heard him laugh like that once, before the crown got too heavy, before the kingdom demanded too much, before everything got complicated and cold. Illyra took her seat beside him, and Darius glanced over with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "You look beautiful," he said. "Thank you." The conversation died there, strangled by everything they weren't saying. Illyra reached for her wine glass and found her hand shaking again. She pulled it back, hid it in her lap, and tried to focus on the meal being served: roasted venison and winter vegetables, food she normally loved but now tasted like ash. Across the table, Serena caught her eye and smiled. It was a small, private smile, the kind that said, "I know something you don't," and it took everything Illyra had not to lunge across the table and rip that smile off her face. Instead, she smiled back. Sweet, poisonous. "Lady Serena," she said, her voice carrying just enough to be heard by the nobles nearby. "You've been such a gracious guest these past weeks. I hope our hospitality has been to your liking." Serena's smile widened. Oh, more than I could have hoped for, Luna. King Darius has been incredibly generous with his time. We've had such enlightening conversations about the future of our territories. Enlightening, Alira repeated. How wonderful. And these conversations, do they always require privacy? I've noticed you meet quite late in the evening. The table went silent. Even the servants stopped moving, sensing the shift in the air, the way the temperature seemed to drop several degrees. Darius's hand found Alira's under the table, his grip tight enough to bruise. Alira. She pulled away. I'm only asking, my love. As your Luna, I like to know what alliances we're forming, what promises are being made. Serena's expression never changed, but something flickered in her eyes, triumph maybe, or satisfaction at having finally drawn blood. The king and I were discussing trade routes, she said smoothly. Nothing that would concern you, Luna. These are matters of strategy, not sentiment. And there it was, the line drawn in the sand. The suggestion that Alira was too soft, too emotional, too much of a liability to be included in the real decisions of power. Darius stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the stone floor. If you'll excuse us, he said to the table at large, the Luna and I need to speak privately. He didn't wait for her agreement, just turned and walked toward the side corridor, expecting her to follow. And she did, because that's what she'd always done. Followed him, trusted him, believed in him even when everyone else doubted. But tonight, something in her was breaking, and she wasn't sure she could keep pretending it wasn't. Darius led her to his study, a room lined with maps and battle plans, and the accumulated weight of 1,000 difficult decisions. He closed the door behind them and then just stood there, one hand braced against the wood, his shoulders tense. You embarrassed me, he said finally. In front of the entire court. Alira laughed, a sharp, bitter sound. I embarrassed you. Are you serious right now? He turned to face her, and for the first time in weeks she saw real emotion in his eyes. Anger, frustration, maybe even guilt buried deep beneath the rest. You can't question my alliances in public, he said. You can't undermine my authority like that. Then stop giving me reason to question. Stop disappearing in the middle of the night. Stop looking at her the way you used to look at me. The words came out raw and ragged, and Alira hated herself for it, hated the weakness in her voice, the desperate edge that made her sound like she was begging. Darius's expression shifted, something painful crossing his features before he could lock it down. I'm trying to hold this kingdom together, Alira. Do you have any idea how fragile everything is right now? The northern clans are one bad harvest away from revolt. The southern territories want concessions I can't give without looking weak. I'm fighting on 6 different fronts, and I need every alliance I can get. And that requires you to spend your nights with Serena Vale? She's a means to an end, nothing more. Alira stepped closer, close enough to see the flecks of gold in his dark eyes, close enough to smell the pine and smoke scent that used to mean safety. Swear it, she said. Look me in the eyes and swear on our bond that nothing has happened between you. For a long moment, Darius just stared at her. And then he did something that shattered her completely. He looked away. That's what I thought, Alira whispered. She turned and walked out before the tears could fall, before he could see just how thoroughly he'd destroyed her. Behind her, she heard him call her name, but she didn't stop. Couldn't stop. Because if she stayed, if she let him make excuses or try to explain, she might forgive him. And some things, once broken, couldn't be fixed with words. Once. 3 days later, the royal gathering was announced. A celebration of unity, the invitation said. A chance for all the major pacts and territories to come together and reaffirm their bonds of loyalty and friendship. Alira knew what it really was, a performance. A chance for Darius to parade his power and his alliances in front of everyone who might be considering rebellion. And she would be expected to stand beside him, smile, and play the role of the devoted Luna. She almost refused, almost told him to go to hell and stayed in her rooms, consequences be damned. But Kael found her the morning of the gathering, his expression grim. You need to be there, he said without preamble, because whatever's going to happen, it's going to happen tonight. I can feel it. What are you talking about? Kael handed her a folded piece of paper, and Alira's hands trembled as she opened it. Inside was a schedule, times and locations, all in Serena's handwriting. And there, Circled in red ink was tonight's date and a single word. Announcement. Elira's blood turned to ice. What announcement? I don't know. But my sources say Serena's been preparing for something big. Something that's going to shift the balance of power in this kingdom. And Darius? Kael's jaw tightened. I think he knows, Lyra. I think he's been planning this with her. The paper crumpled in Elira's fist, and she felt her wolf surge up inside her, all teeth and fury and the desperate need to rip something apart. Then I'll be there, she said softly. And if he's done what I think he's done, if he's betrayed everything we built together, then tonight won't just be about unity. It'll be about reckoning. The grand ballroom glittered with candlelight and costly decorations, every surface draped in silk and flowers, the air thick with perfume and political tension. Elira entered alone, her head high, wearing a gown of midnight blue that hugged her body like armor. She'd chosen it deliberately. It was the same dress she'd worn the night Darius had first declared his intention to make her his Luna, back when the entire pack had laughed at the idea of a nobody from the outer villages standing beside their king. She'd proven them all wrong then. She'd do it again now. The crowd parted as she walked through, conversations dying in her wake. She could feel their stares, their pity, their morbid curiosity about what was going to happen when the Luna and the king's mistress finally came face to face in public. Let them watch, Elira thought. Let them all watch. Darius was at the center of the room, surrounded by nobles and sycophants, and Serena was at his side, her hand resting possessively on his arm. When he saw Elira approaching, something flickered across his face. Regret, maybe, or fear. Good. He should be afraid. Luna Elira, Serena said, her voice dripping with false warmth. How lovely you look tonight. That color suits you. Elira smiled, showing teeth. Lady Serena. Still here, I see. I would have thought you'd have finished your business by now. Oh, my business is just beginning. Before Elira could respond, Darius cleared his throat and raised his hand for silence. The room obeyed instantly, all conversation ceasing as every eye turned toward their king. Thank you all for coming tonight, Darius began, his voice carrying across the ballroom. We gather here to celebrate unity, to reaffirm the bonds that make our kingdom strong. And tonight, I have an announcement that will secure our future for generations to come. Elira's heart slammed against her ribs. No, he wouldn't. Not here. Not in front of everyone. But Darius was already continuing, his words falling like hammer blows. As you know, our kingdom has faced many threats. Internal division, external enemies. The constant struggle to maintain power and territory in a world that respects only strength. And I have come to realize that our current structure, while it has served us well, is no longer sufficient for the challenges ahead. He turned then, and his eyes met Elira's across the room. What she saw there made her blood freeze. Apology. Resignation. Finality. Therefore, Darius said, I am announcing a new alliance, a bond that will unite the southern territories with our own, creating an empire that cannot be challenged or broken. Serena stepped forward, and Elira watched in horror as Darius took her hand. Lady Serena Vale will become my second Luna, and together we will build something greater than any single pack or territory could achieve alone. The ballroom erupted in shocked whispers, but Elira couldn't hear any of it over the roaring in her ears. Second Luna. The words didn't make sense, couldn't make sense, because there was only one Luna, one bond, one vow, absolute loyalty of heart and body. He'd sworn it, in front of the ancestors, in front of everyone, and now he was breaking it, not quietly, not with shame or hesitation, but proudly, publicly, as if it meant nothing at all. Elira's vision narrowed to a single point, Darius's face, Serena's triumphant smile, the way their hands were clasped together like they'd already won. Something inside her snapped, not broke, snapped, like a chain that had been stretched too far, held too tight for too long. She moved before she could think, striding across the ballroom floor with murder in her eyes. The crowd scattered out of her path, sensing the violence radiating off her in waves. No, she said, her voice cutting through the whispers like a blade. Absolutely not. Darius's expression hardened. Elira, this isn't the time. You made a vow, she snarled, stopping 3 feet away from him, close enough to see the guilt he was trying to hide. You swore loyalty, heart, and body. Those were your words. Do they mean nothing now? Things have changed. The kingdom requires— Don't you dare, Elira hissed. Don't you dare hide behind duty and politics when we both know this is about something else entirely. This is about her, about you wanting something new, something easier, something that doesn't remind you of who you used to be before the crown made you into this. Serena stepped forward, her smile razor sharp. My dear Luna, perhaps if you'd been more attentive to the king's needs, more understanding of the pressures he faces, this wouldn't have been necessary. Elira's hand moved on instinct, her claws extending, ready to tear that smile off Serena's face. But before she could strike, Darius grabbed her wrist, his grip iron hard. Enough, he said, his voice low and dangerous. You will not cause a scene. Elira looked down at his hand on her wrist, then back up at his face. And in that moment, she saw the truth of it, saw that he'd already made his choice, already decided that his vow to her was worth less than whatever power or pleasure Serena offered. The bond between them, the one she'd thought was unbreakable, was already dead. He'd just been waiting for the right moment to bury it. She pulled her hand free, her voice dropping to something cold and quiet and absolutely lethal. You want her? Fine, take her. But don't expect me to stand here and play along while you humiliate everything we built. Don't expect me to smile and pretend my heart isn't bleeding out in front of this entire cursed court. She turned to face the assembled nobles, all of them watching with wide eyes and barely concealed excitement. Let me make something very clear, Elira said, her voice ringing out across the ballroom. I am Luna of this pack, not co-Luna, not second choice. And any king who thinks he can break his sacred vow and suffer no consequences is about to learn exactly what happens when you betray someone who gave you everything. The threat hung in the air, sharp and undeniable. And then Elira walked out of the ballroom with her head high and her heart in pieces, leaving Darius and Serena and the wreckage of her life behind her. She made it to the corridor before the shaking started, made it to the empty guardroom before the first sob tore out of her throat. And then she was on the floor, her carefully constructed armor cracking apart. Everything she'd held together for weeks, finally shattering. Kale found her there 20 minutes later, her makeup streaked down her face, her hands still trembling with the urge to destroy something. He didn't say anything, just sat down beside her and let her break. And outside, in the ballroom, the celebration of unity continued without her, as if her pain meant nothing at all. But somewhere in the darkness, in the parts of herself she'd kept locked away for too long, Elira Thorne began to plan. Because if Darius thought this was over, if he thought she would simply fade away and accept her humiliation, he'd forgotten who she really was. She wasn't some delicate flower who withered at the first sign of frost. She was the girl who survived the outer villages, who fought her way into a kingdom that didn't want her, who became Luna not because she was given power, but because she took it. And if her king had become her enemy, then she would do what she'd always done. She would fight. She would survive. And she would make damn sure that everyone who betrayed her paid the price. The question was no longer whether she could break. The question was what she would become when she rose from the ashes. The guardroom smelled like old leather and steel, and Elira stayed on that cold floor longer than she should have, her breathing finally evening out while Kael sat beside her in silence. He didn't offer platitudes or empty comfort. He just existed there, solid and real, while everything else in her world turned to smoke. When she finally spoke, her voice came out rough, scraped raw from crying. I should have seen it coming. Kael shifted beside her, his scarred hands resting on his knees. Maybe. Or maybe you saw what you wanted to see because the alternative was too ugly to face. She turned to look at him, her eyes still wet, but her jaw set hard. That's not helpful. Wasn't trying to be helpful. Was trying to be honest. Elira pushed herself up from the floor, her legs unsteady but her spine straightening with each breath. The weakness was still there, coiled in her chest like a serpent, but she couldn't afford to let it show. Not now. Not when the entire kingdom had just watched her husband publicly choose another woman. The question is what you do next, Kael said, standing with her. Because sitting here bleeding doesn't change anything. Darius made his move. Now you make yours. And what move is that exactly? Challenge him? Fight Serena for a position I've already been told I'm sharing? The bitterness in her voice surprised her. She'd never been bitter before. Angry, yes. Fierce and uncompromising, absolutely. But this corroded feeling, this sense that everything she'd built was rotting from the inside out, that was new. Kale studied her face, his expression unreadable. You want my real advice or the version that keeps you safe? I stopped being safe the moment I married him. Then stop acting like his Luna and start acting like the woman who survived the outer villages. That girl didn't wait for permission. She didn't ask nicely. She took what she needed and burned anyone who got in her way. Illyra felt something shift in her chest, something old and familiar stirring awake after years of being buried beneath royal protocol and political restraint. That girl. The one who'd fought off 3 grown wolves when she was 15 because they thought she'd be easy prey. The one who'd walked into Darius's war camp covered in mud and blood and demanded a place in his pack because she had nowhere else to go and refused to die quietly. She'd become Luna, but maybe she'd forgotten how to be Illyra. Then I need information, she said, her mind already moving, calculating. I need to know exactly what Serena's planning, what she promised him, what leverage she has. Kael's mouth curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. Now you're talking. I've got people. Let me shake some trees, see what falls out. And Darius? What about him? Illyra looked toward the door, toward the ballroom where her husband was probably still playing the magnanimous king, accepting congratulations on his strategic new alliance while Serena hung on his arm like a trophy. I need to know if there's anything left to salvage. If he did this because he actually believes it's necessary, or if he's just a man who got bored with his vows. Kael's expression darkened. Does it matter? Yes. Because if he's doing this for the kingdom, I can work with that. I can fight politics with politics. But if he did it because he wanted her, because our bond meant that little to him. She didn't finish the sentence. Didn't need to. Kael understood perfectly what she was saying. If Darius had betrayed her for power, she could respect that, even while she hated it. Power was something she understood, something she could strategize against. But if he'd betrayed her for desire, for the thrill of someone new, then there was nothing to salvage, just ashes and the memory of promises that had never been real. 3 hours later, Illyra stood in her private chambers, staring at her reflection in the mirror while her handmaid Mira carefully removed the pins from her elaborate hairstyle. The girl's hands were shaking, and Illyra didn't need to ask why. The entire staff would have heard by now, would be whispering in corners about the Luna who'd been replaced, wondering how long before she was sent away entirely. Mira, she said quietly, look at me. The girl's eyes lifted, wide and frightened. What are they saying? In the kitchens, in the stables, everywhere I'm not? Mira swallowed hard. My lady, I'm not asking for comfort. I'm asking for intelligence. Tell me. A long pause. Then Mira's voice, barely above a whisper. They're saying the king needed a stronger alliance, that you're from common blood and Lady Serena brings armies and territory. They're saying it was only a matter of time before he found someone more suitable. Illyra felt the words land like physical blows, each one precisely aimed at the places she was already bleeding. But she kept her face neutral, her breathing steady. And what do you think? Mira met her eyes in the mirror, and for the first time, Illyra saw something other than fear there. Anger, fierce and protective. I think the king is a fool, Mira said, her voice stronger now. I think he had a woman who would have burned the world for him, and he traded her for someone who will only stay as long as it benefits her. And I think anyone who believes blood matters more than loyalty deserves exactly what's coming to them. Something warm unfurled in Illyra's chest, chasing away a fraction of the cold. She reached up and squeezed Mira's hand. Thank you. What will you do, my lady? Illyra stood, moving away from the mirror and toward the window that overlooked the eastern courtyard. Below, she could see the last of the gathering dispersing, nobles climbing into carriages, probably already composing letters to their own territories about the scandal they'd just witnessed. I'm going to remind everyone who I am, Illyra said, and then I'm going to make sure Darius regrets ever thinking I could be replaced. The next morning arrived cold and merciless, dawn light spilling through her windows like an accusation. Illyra had barely slept, her mind spinning through scenarios and strategies, discarding plans as quickly as she formed them. She needed leverage, needed to understand the full scope of what Darius and Serena had orchestrated. The knock on her door came precisely at sunrise. Kale, right on time. She let him in, and he entered carrying a leather satchel that he dropped onto her desk with a heavy thud. "You're not going to like this," he said without preamble. "When have I ever liked anything you've told me?" Kale pulled out a stack of documents, spreading them across the polished wood. Trade agreements, military contracts, letters of intent between Darius and Serena's father, Lord Matthias Vale, going back 6 months. Alira felt her stomach drop. 6 months. This hadn't been a sudden decision or a moment of weakness. This had been planned, calculated, executed with precision while she'd been sleeping beside him every night, trusting him completely. "He's been courting this alliance since before winter," Kyle said, pointing to the earliest document. "Serena arrived 2 weeks ago, but the groundwork was laid long before that. He needed her father's armies to secure the northern border. In exchange, he promised to make her Luna," Alira finished, the pieces clicking into place with horrible clarity. "That's why he's been distant, why he's been avoiding me. He was already committed before she ever arrived. Worse than that," Kale said grimly. "Look at Clause 7 in this contract." Alira's eyes scanned the page, and the words seemed to leap off the parchment, each one a knife between her ribs. In the event of successful bonding between Alpha King Darius Vane and Luna Serena Vale, all previous Luna bonds may be dissolved at the king's discretion to maintain clarity of succession. Her hands crumpled the paper without meaning to. May be dissolved. He was planning to sever their bond entirely, to erase her from his life as if she'd never existed. The rage that swept through her was so powerful she had to grip the edge of the desk to stay upright. Her wolf surged up, demanding blood, demanding violence, demanding that she find Darius right now and tear out his throat. "Breathe," Kael said quietly. "I need you thinking, not reacting." Alira forced air into her lungs, forced her claws to retract, forced the killing instinct back down into the cage where she kept it locked. But it was harder than it should have been, harder than it had ever been before. "There has to be a way out of this," she said. "Some clause, some loophole." "Already looked. The contract's airtight. Matthias Vale had the best legal minds in the Southern Territories draft this thing. Unless Darius voluntarily withdraws, or unless Serena fails to complete the bonding ritual, you're replaceable," Alira finished. The word tasted like poison. Kael's jaw tightened. "I didn't say that. You didn't have to." She turned away from the documents, unable to look at them anymore, unable to face the evidence of how thoroughly she'd been betrayed. 6 months of lies, 6 months of careful manipulation while she'd believed every word he said, every promise about their future together. "What about Serena?" Alira asked. "There has to be something. Nobody's that perfect. Everybody has secrets." Kael flipped to another section of papers. "That's where it gets interesting. Lady Serena's not just here for her father's political ambitions. She's got her own agenda. 3 years ago, she was engaged to a minor lord named Cathan Reeves. High-ranking family, good bloodline, everything proper. Except Cathan had a habit of questioning her decisions, of suggesting she wasn't quite as strategic as she thought. And Cathan disappeared 2 months before the wedding. No body, no evidence, just gone. Serena claimed he ran off with a servant girl, but there were whispers, suspicions that maybe he didn't leave voluntarily. You think she killed him?" Kael shrugged. "Can't prove it. But I've got sources in the Southern Territories who say Serena's the kind of woman who doesn't leave loose ends. If Cathan became a problem, he would have been dealt with, quietly, efficiently." Alira processed this information, her mind racing. If Serena was capable of murder, capable of eliminating anyone who threatened her plans, then Darius wasn't just making a political alliance. He was bringing a viper into their home. The question was whether he knew it, whether he'd looked past the beautiful smile and clever words to see what Serena really was, or whether he simply didn't care. "I need to talk to him," Alira said. "Alone. Without Serena hanging on his arm or the court watching. That's a bad idea. Probably. But I need to hear him say it. Need to look him in the eyes and ask him if everything we had was just a convenient fiction until something better came along." Kael studied her for a long moment. "And if he says yes? If he tells you the bond meant nothing? Then at least I'll know. And I can stop trying to save something that's already dead." "Igip, Finding Darius alone proved more difficult than expected. He'd barricaded himself in his war room with his advisors, and Serena seemed to be everywhere Alira looked, her presence a constant reminder of everything that had been taken. But Alira was patient. She'd learned patience in the outer villages, where rushing meant death and survival meant knowing when to strike. She waited until late afternoon until the advisors had dispersed and Darius emerged from the war room, exhaustion carved into the lines of his face. He looked older than he had a month ago, the weight of the crown pressing down harder than ever. She intercepted him in the corridor, stepping out from the alcove where she'd been watching. "We need to talk." Darius stopped, his shoulders tensing. "Alira, I don't think now is... I don't care what you think. You owe me this conversation." For a moment she thought he might refuse, might brush past her the way he'd been doing for weeks. But something in her expression must have convinced him, because he nodded once and gestured toward a nearby chamber. The room was small, used for private meetings, and it felt suffocating once the door closed behind them. Darius moved to the window, putting distance between them, and Alira noticed he couldn't quite meet her eyes. "Tell me this wasn't planned," she said quietly. "Tell me you didn't spend 6 months negotiating my replacement while sharing my bed." Darius's hands clenched at his sides. "You saw the documents. Of course I saw them. Kael made sure I saw them. So I'll ask again. Was any of it real? The vows, the promises, the nights you held me and told me you'd never let anyone come between us?" He finally turned to face her, and the guilt in his eyes was almost worse than indifference would have been. Because guilt meant he knew exactly what he'd done, knew and chose it anyway. "It was real," he said, and his voice cracked on the words. "All of it. I meant every vow I made to you. Then how could you do this? Because I'm a king before I'm a husband. Because the northern clans are 3 months from open rebellion, and I needed Matthias Vale's armies to hold them back. Because every decision I make has to be for the kingdom, even when it destroys the things I care about most." Alira felt something inside her calcify, hardening into something cold and immovable. "So you sacrificed me. Sacrificed us. For armies and alliances, I sacrificed my own happiness. You were collateral damage." The casual cruelty of it stole her breath. Collateral damage. As if she were an unfortunate casualty of war rather than the woman who'd stood beside him through everything, who'd fought his battles and shared his burdens and believed with her whole heart that they were building something that mattered. "Did you sleep with her?" The question came out flat, emotionless, but her hands were shaking. Darius closed his eyes. "Alira, answer the question." "Once, before I made the final decision. I needed to know if the bond would take. The bond would take, clinical, detached, as if we were discussing livestock breeding rather than the complete destruction of their marriage." Alira felt something break free inside her, something she'd been holding back through all the tears and all the rage. It was clarity, pure and sharp and absolutely merciless. "I want you to understand something," she said, and her voice was steady now, cold as winter ice. "I gave you everything, my loyalty, my trust, my body, my heart. I stood beside you when half the kingdom thought I was unworthy. I learned to be Luna, learned to navigate court politics and smile at people who despised me, all because I believed in you. In us." She took a step closer, and Darius actually flinched. "And you traded it all for an alliance that's going to crumble the moment Serena gets what she really wants. Because that woman doesn't care about you or this kingdom. She cares about power. And the second she finds a better option, she'll gut you just as efficiently as she's gutting me right now." Darius's expression hardened. "You don't know her. I know her better than you do. Because I've been watching her, really watching, while you were too busy being seduced by pretty words and political promises. She's dangerous, Darius, more dangerous than you realize. And when she finally shows you what she really is, I won't be here to save you from it." "You think I need saving? I think you're so desperate to be a strong king that you've forgotten how to be a good man. And that's going to cost you everything." She turned toward the door, done with this conversation, done with trying to make him see reason. "Alira, wait." She stopped, her hand on the doorknob. "I never wanted to hurt you. And that," she said without turning around, "is the saddest part. You never wanted to hurt me, but you did it anyway. Because when it came down to choosing between your vows and your crown, the crown won. It always wins with you." She left him standing there, and this time when the tears came, they were different, not the broken, desperate sobs of last night. These were clean and cold, washing away the last remnants of hope she'd been clinging to. Darius had made his choice. Now she would make hers. Bat. The War Council met the following morning, and Elira attended despite the whispers, despite the way some of the lords couldn't quite hide their smirks. She took her seat at Darius's right hand, the position that had always been hers, and met every challenging gaze with ice-cold composure. Serena was there too, seated across the table, dressed in crimson silk that probably cost more than most families earned in a year. She smiled at Elira, sweet and venomous. "How lovely to see you, Luna Elira. I wasn't sure you'd feel comfortable attending after last night's announcement." "Why wouldn't I be comfortable?" Elira said pleasantly. "I'm still Luna, still the woman who helped build this council. Or did you think one announcement would erase 3 years of work?" Serena's smile never wavered, but something sharp flickered in her eyes. "Of course not. I simply thought you might prefer to step back, given the circumstances. The circumstances being that my husband is a faithless bastard who broke his vows. No, I think I'll stay. Someone needs to make sure this kingdom doesn't burn down while everyone's distracted by shiny new alliances." Lord Garrett, one of the older council members, cleared his throat awkwardly. "Perhaps we should focus on the agenda." "Actually," Elira interrupted, "I have some concerns about the proposed treaty with the Vale territories." Darius's head snapped toward her. "This isn't the time. On the contrary, this is exactly the time. You're proposing to bind our kingdom to an alliance that gives Lord Matthias significant military access to our northern borders. I'd like to understand the exit clauses." "There are no exit clauses," Serena said smoothly. "This is a permanent alliance sealed by the Luna Bond." "Interesting," Elira said. "So if, hypothetically, this new Luna Bond were to fail or be dissolved, what happens to Matthias's armies? Do they withdraw, or do we find ourselves with a foreign military presence we can't remove?" The room went very quiet. Several council members exchanged glances, clearly not having considered this scenario. "The bond won't fail," Darius said, his voice tight with warning. Elira turned to look at him, her expression innocent. "I'm sure it won't, but I learned from you, my king, that good strategy always accounts for contingencies. So I'm asking, what's the contingency plan if your second Luna doesn't work out the way you hope?" Serena's composure cracked just slightly, a flash of anger crossing her features before she smoothed it away. "You seem very invested in seeing this alliance fail, Luna Elira." "Not at all. I'm invested in protecting this kingdom, which is why I've taken the liberty of having our legal advisors review the treaty documents. And they found some fascinating clauses buried in the fine print." She pulled out her own set of papers, sliding them across the table. Kyle had worked through the night gathering this information, and it was damning. For instance, she continued, "Did the council know that if King Darius dies without a direct heir from Luna Serena, control of the Northern Territories defaults to Lord Matthias? Or that Serena retains the right to dissolve her Luna Bond if she deems the alliance politically disadvantageous, but Darius has no equivalent right?" One by one, the council members picked up the documents, their expressions darkening as they read. "This is a takeover contract dressed up as a marriage alliance," Elira said flatly. "Give it 5 years, maybe less, and Matthias Vale will control half this kingdom without ever having to invade." "That's a gross mischaracterization," Serena snapped, her composure finally shattering. "These are standard protective clauses." "Standard for what? A hostile acquisition?" "Because from where I'm sitting, this looks like your father saw an opportunity to expand his territory, and you're the weapon he's using to do it." "Enough," Darius said, his voice sharp. "Elira, a word. Now." He stood and strode from the room, clearly expecting her to follow. She did, but only because she'd made her point. The council had seen the documents. Doubt had been planted. Sometimes that was all you needed. Darius rounded on her the moment they were alone in the corridor, his face flushed with anger. "What the hell was that?" "That was me doing the job you apparently forgot needed doing. Protecting this kingdom from threats. Even when those threats come wrapped in pretty packages and political promises. You're trying to sabotage this alliance. I'm trying to save you from your own stupidity. Did you even read those clauses before you signed them? Or were you too distracted by Serena's smile to notice you were handing over half your kingdom?" Darius grabbed her arm, his grip tight enough to bruise. You don't know what you're talking about. Then explain it to me. Explain how giving Matthias Vale permanent military access and default inheritance rights is good for this kingdom. Explain how binding yourself to a woman who can walk away whenever she wants while you're locked in forever is a strategic victory. She wrenched her arm free, her wolf rising to the surface, amber bleeding into her eyes. You want to replace me? Fine. But don't expect me to stand by quietly while you destroy everything we built because you're thinking with what's between your legs instead of what's between your ears. Darius's hand shot out, slamming against the wall beside her head, caging her in. For a moment they stood frozen, breathing hard, close enough that she could see the gold flecks in his dark eyes, could smell the familiar scent of him beneath the anger. You have no idea what I've sacrificed, he said, his voice low and dangerous. What I've given up to keep this kingdom together. I was your sacrifice, Elira said quietly. Me. Our bond. Everything we had. That's what you gave up, and the worst part is you can't even admit it was a mistake. Something shifted in his expression, something that might have been regret if she was generous enough to see it that way. I never wanted to hurt you, he said again, and she realized it was the only truth he had left to offer. But you did, she whispered, and now you have to live with that. She ducked under his arm and walked away, leaving him alone in the corridor with his choices and his crown and the hollow victory of an alliance that was already starting to crack. That night, Elira met with Kael in secret, in one of the old storage rooms beneath the castle, where the walls were thick enough that no one could overhear. The council's rattled, Kael reported. 3 of the lords approached me after the meeting, asking questions about the treaty clauses you highlighted. Garrett in particular seems concerned. Good. Keep pushing. I want everyone on that council questioning whether Darius knows what he's doing. And if they decide he doesn't, then they'll start looking for alternative leadership. Someone who puts the kingdom first instead of personal desires. Kael studied her face in the dim lamplight. You're talking about a coup. I'm talking about survival. Darius made his choice. He chose Serena and her father's armies over everything we built. But that doesn't mean I have to let them destroy this kingdom. You know, if you go down this path, there's no coming back. Darius will see it as treason. Elira met his eyes, her expression hard as stone. Then he should have thought about that before he committed treason against our bond. I gave him my loyalty. He threw it away. Now I owe him nothing. Kael nodded slowly, accepting her decision. Then we need to move fast. Serena's not stupid. She'll see what you're doing and counter. Let her try. I grew up fighting for scraps in the outer villages. She grew up in a manor with servants and tutors. When this gets ugly, and it will get ugly, I'm betting on the girl who knows how to survive over the princess who's never had to fight for anything real. There's one more thing, Kael said, his expression grim. I've been digging into Serena's background. That fiancé who disappeared, Catherine Reeves? What about him? I found someone who was willing to talk. A servant who worked in Serena's household back then. She said Catherine didn't run away. Said she saw Serena and her brother dispose of something wrapped in canvas, something human-sized, in the middle of the night 3 days before the wedding. Elira felt ice slide down her spine. She killed him. Can't prove it. The servant disappeared a week later and no one's seen her since. But yeah, I think Serena killed him, and I think she'll kill anyone else who becomes inconvenient, including Darius, once she's secured her position. Then we use it, quietly, carefully, plant the seeds with the right people that maybe our new Luna isn't quite as innocent as she appears. And if Darius finds out you're spreading rumors about his new mate, then he'll have to decide whether his pride matters more than the truth. Either way, we win. If he believes us, he distances himself from Serena. If he doesn't, we use his blindness to turn the council against him. Kael shook his head, something like admiration in his expression. You've gotten ruthless. I've gotten realistic. This isn't about pride anymore, Kael. This is about survival, and I'm not planning to lose. Momot. The whispers started the next day. Quiet at first, just concerned questions about Lady Serena's past, about the mysterious disappearance of her previous fiancé, about whether anyone had truly vetted her background before agreeing to this alliance. Elira didn't spread the rumors herself. She didn't have to. Kael had people, and those people had friends, and soon half the castle staff was exchanging meaningful looks whenever Serena passed by. Serena noticed. Of course she noticed. She was too smart not to. They confronted each other in the library 3 days after the council meeting, both of them pretending to browse the shelves while the tension between them could have cut steel. "You've been busy," Serena said, not bothering with pleasantries, "spreading lies, turning people against me." "I haven't said a word against you," Illyra replied calmly. "I don't have to. Your own history speaks for itself. My history is none of your concern. It became my concern the moment you decided to steal my husband. Now I'm simply making sure everyone knows exactly who they're dealing with." Serena's hand shot out, grabbing Illyra's wrist hard enough to hurt. Her eyes flashed with something violent, something barely controlled. "You're playing a dangerous game, Luna, one you can't possibly win." Illyra smiled, cold and sharp. "I survived 3 winter famines in the outer villages before I was 10 years old. Survived a pack war that killed half my settlement. Survived clawing my way into a kingdom that didn't want me and becoming Luna despite every noble in this castle betting against me. You think I'm afraid of you? You should be. Why? Because you'll make me disappear like you did Catherine Reeves." Serena's grip tightened, her claws extending slightly, breaking skin. Blood welled up, dark and warm. "Careful," Serena hissed. "Accusations like that could get you killed, only if they're not true. And we both know they are." For a long moment they stood locked together, blood and violence hanging in the air between them. Then Serena released her, stepping back with a smile that promised future pain. "Enjoy your little rebellion while it lasts," she said, "because when I'm done you'll have nothing. No title, no position, no king. You'll be exactly what you were before Darius found you. Worthless." She swept out of the library, leaving Illyra standing there with blood dripping from her wrist and rage burning so hot she could barely breathe. But beneath the rage was something else, something cold and calculating. Because Serena had just made a critical mistake. She'd revealed herself, shown the violent edge beneath the polished exterior, and Illyra was going to make sure everyone saw it. The bonding ceremony was scheduled for the following week, a lavish affair that would officially make Serena Darius's second Luna. The preparations consumed the castle, servants rushing everywhere with flowers and decorations and the trappings of celebration. Illyra watched it all with detached clarity, her mind working through scenarios and possibilities. She had 1 week to either stop this or position herself to survive what came after. Kale brought her more information daily. Serena's father was already moving troops toward the northern border, ostensibly to reinforce Darius's positions, but actually establishing permanent military presence. 3 council members had been quietly approached about swearing loyalty to Serena once the bond was complete. And Serena herself had been meeting privately with several key nobles, offering positions and favors in exchange for their support. It was a coup in slow motion, and Darius was either blind to it or willfully ignorant. "We're running out of time," Kale said during one of their late-night meetings. "If that bonding ceremony happens, Serena's position becomes nearly unassailable. Then we make sure it doesn't happen." "How?" "Darius has made it clear he's going through with this. You can't just cancel a royal bonding." "What shos?" "No. But I can give the council reason to demand he postpone it, and I can make sure that when the truth about Serena comes out, it comes from someone they trust." "Who?" Illyra smiled grimly. "Lord Garrett. He's the oldest member of the council, the most respected. If he voices concerns about Serena's background, about the treaty terms, about moving too fast, others will listen. And how do you get Garrett on your side? By giving him information he can't ignore. Kael, I need you to find proof of what happened to Catherine Reeves. Real proof, not just servant gossip. Something concrete enough that Garrett can't dismiss it. That might not be possible. It was 3 years ago, and Serena's been very careful. Then find something else. Financial records showing payoffs to silence witnesses. Travel documents that prove she was somewhere she claimed not to be. Anything that establishes a pattern of deception." Kale was quiet for a moment. "If I do this, if I dig that deep, Serena will know. She'll come after you directly. Let her. I'm done hiding, done playing the wounded Luna while she takes everything from me. This isn't just about pride anymore, is it? No. It's about making sure that when I walk away from this, and I will walk away, I leave this kingdom in better shape than I found it. Even if Darius is too blind to see the danger he's in, Even if he hates me for it, I won't let Serena destroy everything we built. Kael reached across the table and gripped her hand, his scarred fingers warm and solid. You know I'm with you, whatever happens. I know. That's the only thing keeping me sane right now. He adds. 3 days before the bonding ceremony, Lord Garrett requested a private audience with Elira. She met him in one of the formal receiving rooms, her heart pounding, but her expression calm. Garrett was in his 60s, gray-haired and sharp-eyed, one of the few nobles who'd supported her claim to be Luna from the beginning. He'd told her once that he respected anyone who fought their way up from nothing, that it showed character the soft-raised nobles lacked. Luna Elira, he said, bowing slightly. Thank you for seeing me. Of course, Lord Garrett. What can I do for you? He sat heavily, his expression troubled. I've been reviewing the documents you presented at the War Council, the treaty terms with Lord Matthias Vale. And I'm concerned, deeply concerned. These aren't alliance terms, they're surrender terms dressed up as partnership. Elira felt something loosen in her chest. Someone else saw it. Someone besides her and Kael. I had the same reaction, she said carefully. But King Darius seems convinced the military support is worth the concessions. Military support we may not be able to get rid of once it's here. Garrett leaned forward, his voice dropping. I've also heard disturbing rumors about Lady Serena's past. A missing fiancé, unexplained deaths in her household. I need to know, is there truth to any of it? This was the moment. The point where Elira either committed to this path or backed down and accepted her fate. She thought about Darius, about the man she'd loved, the vows he'd broken, about Serena's cold smile and violent threats, about everything she stood to lose if she did nothing. Yes, she said simply, there's truth to it. And I have someone working to find proof. Garrett's expression hardened. Then we have a serious problem. Because if Darius completes this bonding to a woman who's not only politically dangerous but potentially a murderer, he's putting the entire kingdom at risk. What do you suggest? Garrett stood, pacing to the window. I suggest we delay the ceremony, give ourselves time to investigate these allegations properly. If they're unfounded, no harm done. But if they're true, then we can't let this bonding happen, Elira finished. Exactly. I'll speak to the other council members. Quietly. See how many I can bring to our side. But Elira, yes? This is dangerous. If Darius perceives this as you trying to sabotage his alliance out of jealousy or revenge, he could move against you, strip your title, exile you, worse. I know, she said, but I'm not doing this out of jealousy. I'm doing it because someone has to protect this kingdom, even if it means standing against my own king. Garrett studied her for a long moment, then nodded. You've become quite a leader, Luna, stronger than most of us gave you credit for. I had a good teacher, she said, even if he forgot his own lessons. The night before the bonding ceremony, Kael burst into Elira's chambers without knocking, his face flushed with exertion and something that might have been triumph. I found it, he said, dropping a leather folder onto her desk. Proof. Elira's hand shook as she opened it. Inside were financial records, witness statements, and a series of letters in Serena's own handwriting. The letters were to her brother, discussing how to handle the Cathan problem, how to make sure he disappeared quietly without raising suspicion. The financial records showed large payments to several individuals who'd worked in Serena's household, all dated shortly after Cathan's disappearance. And the witness statement was from a groundskeeper who'd seen Serena and her brother loading something into a cart in the middle of the night, something that left bloodstains on the cobblestones. This is enough, Elira breathed. This is more than enough. There's more, Kael said. I also found evidence that Matthias Vale has been secretly negotiating with the Western clans. If this alliance goes through, if Serena becomes Luna, he's planning to use his military presence here as leverage to force territorial concessions from Darius. It's exactly what I thought. This whole thing is a takeover. Kael nodded grimly. Question is, what do we do with this information? We take it to the council, tonight, before the ceremony can happen. Darius will fight you. He's already committed to this. Then he'll have to choose his pride and his new mate, or the truth and the kingdom's safety. Elira gathered the documents, her movements precise and controlled even though her heart was racing. This was it, the point of no return. Once she presented this evidence, there would be no going back, no reconciliation, no chance to salvage anything with Darius. But she'd already known that, had known it the moment he'd chosen Serena over their vows. "Let's end this," she said, and together she and Kael walked into the night, carrying the truth that would either save the kingdom or destroy everything she had left. The council chamber was cold at midnight, lit only by the oil lamps Kael had placed around the long table. Alira stood at the head with the evidence spread before her like weapons, each document a carefully sharpened blade. Lord Garrett arrived first, his face grim and determined. Then came Lord Thaddeus, Lady Marin, and 3 others, enough to form a quorum, enough to make this official. But when the door opened again, it wasn't another council member, it was Darius. He stood in the doorway with Serena at his side, and the expression on his face made Alira's blood run cold. Not surprise. Not confusion, just a terrible resigned certainty, as if he'd been expecting this all along. Behind them came 6 royal guards, hands on their sword hilts. "So this is how betrayal looks," Darius said quietly, his eyes locked on Alira. "My own Luna, conspiring with my council in the dead of night. Should I be surprised?" "This isn't betrayal," Garrett said, standing. "This is due diligence. We have evidence that requires immediate attention before tomorrow's ceremony." "Evidence," Darius repeated, stepping into the room. He moved like a predator, controlled and dangerous. Or fabrications designed to undermine an alliance that threatens certain people's positions? The accusation hung in the air, and Alira felt the trap closing around her with perfect, horrible precision. Because suddenly she understood. This wasn't Darius stumbling onto their meeting by accident. He'd known. Had probably known for days. Someone had told him. Her eyes swept the council members, looking for the crack, the guilt, the telltale sign of who'd sold her out. But everyone looked shocked, confused, except Lord Thaddeus wouldn't meet her gaze. There's a concept in warfare that seasoned generals understand instinctively. The moment you realize you've been outmaneuvered, the split second when all your careful planning reveals itself as the very trap your enemy wanted you to walk into. That moment tastes like ash and feels like drowning. Alira was tasting it now, feeling it crush her lungs while she forced herself to stay standing, to keep her spine straight even as everything collapsed around her. "You went to Thaddeus, didn't you?" she said to Darius. Offered him something. Territory, position, maybe just the promise that he'd be on the winning side when this was over. Darius's expression didn't change. Lord Thaddeus understands loyalty, understands that questioning your king's decisions isn't the same as serving your kingdom. Thaddeus finally looked up, and there was shame in his eyes, but also defiance. "I did what was necessary. You were trying to sabotage a vital alliance based on rumors and jealousy." "Jealousy," Alira repeated, her voice deadly calm. "Is that what we're calling murder now?" She grabbed the documents, thrust them toward Darius. "These aren't rumors. These are financial records, witness statements, letters in Serena's own handwriting discussing how to make her previous fiancé disappear. This is proof that the woman you're bonding tomorrow is a killer." Serena stepped forward, her face a perfect mask of wounded innocence. "Those documents are forgeries, obviously fabricated by someone desperate to maintain her position." "Forgeries," Kael snarled. "I pulled those from 3 different archives across 2 territories. The handwriting's been verified by experts." "Experts you paid," Serena shot back. "How convenient that this evidence appears the night before the ceremony. How perfectly timed." "Because timing matters when you're trying to stop a travesty," Garrett said, his voice sharp. "King Darius, at minimum, we need to postpone the bonding until these allegations can be properly investigated." Darius's jaw tightened. "There will be no postponement. The ceremony proceeds as scheduled." The finality in his voice sent ice through Alira's veins. This wasn't about evidence anymore, wasn't about truth or investigation. He'd made his decision, and nothing she presented would change it. "Why?" she asked, and hated how her voice cracked. "Why are you so determined to go through with this, even when confronted with proof that she's dangerous?" "Because I already knew." The words dropped into the room like stones into still water, the ripples of shock spreading across every face. Alira felt the floor tilt beneath her. "You knew?" Darius moved closer, and she saw something in his eyes she'd never seen before. A cold calculation that had nothing to do with the man she'd married, and everything to do with the king he'd become. I knew about Catherine Reeves, he said. Knew that Serena had him killed when he became a liability to her family's political ambitions. I've known since before she arrived at this castle. Then why? Because that's exactly the kind of Luna I need. Someone who understands that power requires hard choices. Someone who won't hesitate to do what's necessary, no matter how ugly it gets. His words were a physical blow, each one landing with brutal precision. Alira staggered back, her hand catching the edge of the table to keep from falling. You need someone who murders people who inconvenience her? That's your standard for a partner now? I need someone who's ruthless enough to help me hold this kingdom together. You were always too soft, Alira. Too concerned with honor and fairness and doing the right thing. That's admirable in peacetime. But we're not in peacetime. We're in a slow-burning war with enemies on every border and traitors in every shadow. So you chose a monster. I chose a survivor. Serena understands that sometimes you have to become the monster to keep worse monsters at bay. There's something uniquely devastating about hearing someone you love justify their own corruption. About watching them twist logic until cruelty becomes pragmatism and betrayal becomes strategy. It's not just the loss of who they were, it's the realization that maybe they were never that person to begin with. Maybe you just saw what you wanted to see because the alternative was too terrible to face. Garrett stood abruptly, his chair scraping against stone. This is madness. You're binding yourself to a woman who kills her own allies. What happens when you become inconvenient to her ambitions? Then I'll deal with that when it comes. But right now, I need her father's armies and the territorial access that comes with this alliance. Everything else is secondary. Including your vows to me, Alira said quietly. Including the bond we swore was unbreakable. Darius finally looked at her, really looked at her, and what she saw in his face broke something fundamental inside her. I'm sorry, he said. I truly am. But the king I need to be can't afford to keep promises the man I was made to a woman I've outgrown. Outgrown. As if she were a childhood toy he'd moved past, something quaint and nostalgic but ultimately useless. The rage that swept through her was so powerful her vision actually blurred, her wolf surging to the surface, demanding blood. She felt her claws extend, felt the shift beginning in her bones. Kael's hand closed around her wrist, anchoring her. Don't. Not here. Not like this. He was right. Attacking Darius now would only prove his point, would make her look unstable and jealous instead of justified. But holding back that violence, swallowing it down when every instinct screamed for her to tear his throat out, that might have been the hardest thing she'd ever done. Serena was watching her with undisguised satisfaction, and Alira realized this was exactly what she'd wanted. To see Alira lose control, to watch her destroy herself with rage and desperation. So she did the opposite. She straightened, smoothed her expression into something cold and unreadable. When she spoke, her voice was steady, almost pleasant. I see. Then I suppose there's nothing left to discuss. Darius's brow furrowed, clearly expecting more of a fight. Alira? No, really. You've made yourself clear. You want someone ruthless. Someone who kills without hesitation. Someone who values power over principles. That's not me. It never will be. She gathered the documents, her movements precise and controlled. But let me make something equally clear. When this alliance falls apart, and it will fall apart, because women like Serena don't share power, they take it. Don't come looking for me to save you. Don't expect me to stand beside you when her father's armies turn from allies to occupiers. And don't you dare expect me to forgive you when you finally realize what you've thrown away. She turned to the council members. I appreciate your support tonight, but it's clear that our king has made his choice. The only question now is what choice each of you will make when the consequences come due. Then she walked toward the door, Kael falling into step beside her. Stop, Darius commanded. Alira kept walking. I said stop. The guards moved to block the doorway, hands on weapons. Alira stopped 3 feet from them, her expression unchanging. Are you going to have me arrested? She asked, without turning around. Lock me up to prevent me from disrupting your precious ceremony? The silence stretched for a long moment. Then Darius's voice, tight with frustration. Let her go. The guard stepped aside. Alira walked through, and the cold night air hit her face like a slap, bracing and clarifying. Behind her, she heard Serena's voice, sweet and victorious. I told you she'd try to sabotage us. Some women just can't accept when they've been replaced by someone better. And Darius saying nothing, not defending her, not even acknowledging the cruelty. That silence was somehow worse than anything else that had happened tonight. But Kale followed her back to her chambers, neither of them speaking until the door was closed and locked behind them. Then Elira finally let herself shake, let the controlled facade crack just enough to show the devastation beneath. He knew, she whispered. All this time, I thought we were uncovering something that would shock him into seeing reason. But he already knew. He chose her anyway. Kyle paced the room, his own anger barely contained. Thaddeus sold us out. Probably the moment we approached him. That bastard went straight to Darius. It doesn't matter now. The bonding ceremony is tomorrow. Serena becomes Luna, and I... She stopped, unable to finish the sentence. What was she now? Still technically Luna, but how long would that last once Serena's position was secure? Days? Weeks? We could run, Kyle said. Leave tonight, take horses and be across the border by dawn. And go where? I'm Luna of Blackridge. This is the only home I've had since the outer villages, the only place I've ever belonged. You don't belong here anymore, Lyra. Not if Darius has turned into this. Not if he's willing to bind himself to a murderer and call it strategy. Elira sank into the chair by her window, staring out at the mountains she'd grown to love. Running felt like surrender, like admitting that Darius and Serena had won completely, but staying might mean dying. There's a third option, she said slowly, an idea forming. Dangerous, possibly suicidal, but better than either running or waiting for Serena to eliminate her. What option? I attend the ceremony, stand there beside Darius like the dutiful first Luna, and when they complete the bonding ritual, when Serena's guard is down because she thinks she's won, I challenge her. A formal challenge? Kael's eyes widened. To the death? Traditional pack law says any Luna can be challenged by another ranked female. If I win, I prove I'm stronger. Force Darius to acknowledge that his precious, ruthless Luna isn't as formidable as he thinks. And if you lose, then at least I go down fighting instead of slinking away in the night. Kael grabbed her shoulders, forcing her to meet his eyes. Listen to me. Serena's trained her whole life in combat. She's bigger than you, has professional instruction, probably fights dirty as hell. You're good, but I'm desperate. And desperate people fight harder than trained ones because we have nothing left to lose. This is insane. Probably. But I'm tired of playing by their rules, Kyle. Tired of being the reasonable one, while everyone else abandons honor and decency. If Darius wants ruthless, I'll show him ruthless. If Serena wants to take my position, she'll have to kill me for it. In war, there comes the moment when conventional strategy fails, when all the careful planning reveals itself as inadequate to the reality you face. In that moment, soldiers fall back on instinct, on the primal drive to survive by any means necessary. Elira had reached that moment. Everything civilized in her, everything that had learned to navigate court politics with grace and diplomacy, was burning away. What remained was the girl from the outer villages who'd survived by being meaner and more determined than everyone who tried to break her. Kael released her, stepping back with resignation in his eyes. You're really going to do this. I'm really going to do this. Then I'm standing with you, whatever happens. I know. That's why you're the only person left I trust. Mats. The morning of the bonding ceremony arrived with brutal sunshine, as if the weather itself was mocking her pain. Elira dressed carefully in formal Luna regalia, deep blue silk embroidered with silver wolves, her hair braided in the traditional style, every inch the queen she'd fought to become. Mira helped her, tears streaming down the girl's face. I can't believe he's doing this, she whispered. I can't believe he'd throw you away for her. Believe it. Men discard what they can't control. I stopped being controllable a long time ago. What will you do? Elira met her eyes in the mirror, something they'll never forget. The ceremony was held in the great hall, packed with nobles and visiting dignitaries, all of them dressed in their finest to witness history. Elira entered alone, her head high, and felt every eye track her progress to the front of the hall where Darius stood waiting. He was dressed in full royal regalia, looking every inch the powerful king. Beside him, Serena wore white, the traditional bonding color, her dark hair cascading down her back, her smile radiant and triumphant. They looked perfect together, matched in ambition and ruthlessness. It made Alira sick. The ceremony began with traditional words, ancient phrases about unity and strength, and the bonds that held packs together. The officiant was Elder Marcus, a man who'd been performing bonding ceremonies for 40 years, and even he looked uncomfortable with this perversion of tradition. Alpha King Darius Vane, do you accept Serena Vale as your Luna, to stand beside you, to share your burdens, to rule with wisdom and strength? I do. The words were steady, certain, no hesitation at all. Luna Serena Vale, do you accept Darius Vane as your alpha, to follow his leadership, to support his reign, to honor the bond you forged today? I do. Serena's voice was clear and strong, her eyes locked on Darius with perfect devotion. Then by the power vested in me and by the laws of our people, I declare this bond, I challenge. Alira's voice cut through the ceremony like a blade, sharp and unmistakable. The hall went dead silent, every conversation dying mid-word. Elder Marcus turned to her, shock written across his weathered face. Luna Alira, this is highly irregular. Traditional pack law allows any ranked female to challenge a newly bonded Luna before the ceremony is complete. I invoke that right. Darius's face had gone white. Alira, don't do this. Why not? Afraid your new Luna can't handle herself in actual combat? Or are you worried that maybe I'm stronger than you've convinced yourself I am? Serena stepped forward, her expression shifting from triumph to calculation. You want to challenge me? After everything you've already lost? I want to prove that strength isn't about who's willing to kill the most people. It's about who survives when everything's been stripped away. So yes, Serena, I challenge you, right here, right now, to the death. The crowd erupted in shocked whispers, nobles talking over each other, some horrified, some excited at the prospect of blood. Elder Marcus looked between them, clearly torn. This is unprecedented in modern times. King Darius, do you consent to this challenge? Every eye turned to Darius. His jaw was clenched so tight, Alira could see the muscle jumping, his hands fisted at his sides. If he refused, he'd look weak, like he was protecting Serena because she couldn't protect herself. If he accepted, one of his Lunas would die today. Maybe the one he'd chosen to replace. Maybe the one he'd already discarded. Alira watched him calculate, watched him weigh political ramifications against personal preference. And in that moment, she knew exactly what he'd choose. The challenge is accepted, Darius said flatly. Traditional combat rules, no weapons, fight until one yields or dies. Serena's smile was razor sharp. This won't take long. Don't be so sure, Alira replied. The crowd shifted, forming a circle in the center of the hall, giving them space. Someone pushed the furniture back against the walls. This was happening. Actually happening. Alira stripped off her formal jacket, leaving just the fitted shirt beneath, rolled her shoulders, feeling her wolf stir with anticipation. It had been too long since she'd let it truly loose, too long since she'd fought for something that mattered instead of just going through diplomatic motions. Serena removed her white bonding gown, revealing fighting leathers beneath. Of course she'd come prepared. Had probably hoped Alira would challenge her, had planned for this exact scenario. Across the circle, Kael caught her eye and nodded once. Whatever happens, I'm with you. Elder Marcus raised his hand. By traditional law, this challenge is recognized. Fight with honor. Begin. Serena moved first, faster than Alira expected, closing the distance between them in 2 long strides. Her fist came up in a vicious uppercut that Alira barely dodged, the air displacement actually stirring her hair. Alira countered with a low sweep, trying to take Serena's legs out, but the other woman jumped over it and came down with an elbow aimed at Alira's spine. Alira rolled, came up in a crouch, and launched herself forward. They collided hard, both of them shifting partially, claws extending, teeth lengthening. The fight devolved into something primal and vicious, all technique abandoning them in favor of pure survival instinct. Serena was stronger, had better training, but Alira was faster, meaner, willing to fight dirty in ways that professional combat instruction never taught. She went for the eyes, the throat, any vulnerable point she could reach. Serena blocked most of it, but not all. And soon they were both bleeding, both breathing hard. The crowd was screaming, some cheering for Elira, some for Serena, the noise building into a deafening roar. "Is this what you wanted?" Serena hissed, her claws raking across Elira's ribs, drawing blood. "To prove you're still relevant? You're pathetic. I'm the woman who survived everything this world threw at her," Elira snarled back, catching Serena's wrist and twisting hard enough to hear bone creak. "What are you except Daddy's weapon?" Serena's eyes flashed with genuine rage, and she brought her knee up hard into Elira's stomach. The air exploded from Elira's lungs, and she went down, gasping. "I'm the woman who's going to rule this kingdom," Serena said, standing over her. "And you're the mistake that's about to be erased." She raised her clawed hand for the killing blow. But Elira had been waiting for this, had been counting on Serena's arrogance, making her pause for dramatic effect. Elira's leg shot out, sweeping Serena's ankle, sending her crashing down. Before the other woman could recover, Elira was on top of her, her hand wrapped around Serena's throat, squeezing. "Yield," she growled. Serena's eyes were wide, shocked that Elira had turned the tables. But instead of yielding, she smiled. "Look at you," she choked out, finally willing to kill. Darius was right. You did have it in you. Then her hand shot up, not toward Elira's face, but toward something in her boot. A small blade, hidden, illegal in traditional challenges. She drove it up toward Elira's ribs. Elira saw it coming, twisted, but not fast enough. The blade bit into her side, sharp and burning, and she felt her grip on Serena's throat loosen. Serena shoved her off, rolled away, came up with the blade still in hand. "Cheater!" someone in the crowd yelled. "That's against the rules!" But Serena just smiled, blood on her lips from where Elira had landed a solid hit earlier. Rules are for people who can afford to lose. I can't. She came at Elira again, blade leading, and Elira knew with sudden, terrible clarity that she was going to die here. Was going to bleed out on the floor of the great hall while Darius watched and did nothing. Then Kael was there, stepping between them, his own blade drawn. "Stop!" he commanded. Serena's momentum carried her forward, and Kael caught her wrist, twisted, sent the blade clattering across the floor. The crowd erupted in chaos, half screaming that Kael had interfered, half screaming that Serena had cheated first. Darius was suddenly there too, his voice cutting through the noise. "Enough!" The command cracked like thunder, and everyone froze. Darius looked at Serena, at the illegal blade on the floor, at Elira bleeding from the wound in her side. His expression was unreadable. "The challenge is void," he said. "Serena violated traditional combat rules. The bonding ceremony is postponed until—" "No." The word came from Elira, who'd pushed herself to her feet despite the blood running down her side, despite the pain that made every breath agony. "No postponement. The challenge stands. Elira, you're wounded." And she cheated, which means by traditional law, I win. She brought an illegal weapon into a formal challenge. That's automatic forfeiture. Darius's jaw clenched. That's exactly the law," Elder Marcus interrupted quietly. "I'm sorry, King Darius, but Luna Elira is correct. The moment Lady Serena used that blade, she forfeited the challenge." The hall fell silent, everyone waiting for Darius's response. This was the moment, the final test. Would he honor the law he'd sworn to uphold, or would he twist it to suit his desires? Elira watched him, saw the calculation in his eyes, saw him weighing options, and then she saw him make his choice. "Serena will retain her position," he said. The blade was planted by someone trying to sabotage this alliance. Serena would never cheat. The lie was so blatant, so obvious, that several people actually gasped. "That's insane," Garrett protested. "We all saw—" "You saw what you wanted to see." Darius's voice was cold, final. "The ceremony will proceed. Elira, you are stripped of your title as Luna effective immediately. You have 1 hour to gather your belongings and leave this castle." The words hit like hammer blows, each one shattering something Elira had thought was unbreakable. "You can't do this," she said, her voice barely audible. "I'm your bonded mate. You can't just— I'm the king. I can do anything I want. And what I want is you gone before you cause any more disruption." He turned his back on her, dismissing her as completely as if she'd never existed. And Elira understood, finally and completely, that the man she'd loved was dead, had maybe never existed except in her imagination. What stood before her now was just a king who valued power over everything else, including honor, including her.
Fine, she said quietly. I'll go. But mark my words, Darius, when this kingdom falls, when Serena and her father take everything you've built and leave you with nothing, remember this moment. Remember that you had someone who would have died for you, and you threw her away for an alliance that's going to destroy you. She turned to Kael. Let's go.
Together they walked toward the door, through the crowd that parted silently to let them pass. Behind her, Alira heard Darius resume the ceremony, heard him speak the bonding words with Serena as if nothing had happened. The wound in her side throbbed with each step, but she kept moving, kept her spine straight, kept her head high. She'd lost everything, title, home, the man she'd loved. But she hadn't lost herself. And that, in the end, was going to have to be enough. Mikik. They made it to her chambers with Kael's support, Alira's vision starting to blur from blood loss. Mira was there, already packing, tears streaming down her face. I heard what happened, she said. The whole castle's talking about it. I can't believe he... Help me stop this bleeding, Kael interrupted. Then we need to move fast. Once that ceremony's done, Serena's going to send people to make sure Alira actually leaves. Or doesn't leave at all. They worked quickly, Mira binding the wound while Kael gathered essentials. Not the formal gowns or royal jewels, just practical clothes, weapons, coin. Where will you go? Mira asked. Alira was about to say she didn't know when Kael spoke up. North, to the border clans. They've got no love for Darius, and they'll shelter us long enough to figure out what's next. And then? Kael met Alira's eyes. Then we plan. Because this isn't over, not by a long shot.
Alira wanted to argue, wanted to say she was done fighting, done trying to save a kingdom that had rejected her. But the truth was already forming in her mind, cold and certain. Darius had chosen power and ruthlessness, had aligned himself with a murderer and her ambitious father. And Alira knew exactly how that story would end. Knew that eventually Serena would eliminate Darius the same way she'd eliminated Cathan the moment he stopped being useful. The question was whether Alira would be there to see it, whether she'd help him when the time came or let him reap what he'd sown. They left through a servant's entrance, 3 horses waiting thanks to Kael's foresight. As they rode through the gates, Alira looked back once at Blackridge Keep, at the castle she'd called home for 3 years. Somewhere inside, Darius was completing his bonding to Serena. Somewhere inside, nobles were congratulating him on his strategic alliance. And somewhere inside, Serena was already planning her next move, already calculating how to turn this victory into total domination. Alira turned away, facing north, facing the unknown. She'd come to this kingdom with nothing and left with nothing. But somehow, impossibly, she felt lighter than she had in months, because she was finally free of the illusion that love and loyalty mattered in a world built on power, because she'd finally accepted what she needed to become to survive. And because somewhere deep inside, in the part of her that had survived the outer villages and every other nightmare life had thrown at her, a new resolve was forming. Cold, absolute, unshakable. Darius wanted ruthless. He was going to learn what ruthless really meant. When she came back, and she would come back, it wouldn't be as his discarded Luna begging for scraps. It would be as something far more dangerous. The ride north was brutal, pushing the horses hard to put distance between them and any pursuit Serena might send. The wound in Alira's side ached with each movement, but she gritted her teeth and kept going. Pain was just another thing to survive. They rode for 6 hours straight before Kael finally called a halt near a river crossing. Alira slid off her horse, and immediately her legs gave out, the adrenaline that had been holding her together finally draining away. Kael caught her before she hit the ground. Easy. You've lost a lot of blood. I'm fine. You're not fine. You're half dead and running on spite. Spite's kept me alive this long. He helped her to a fallen log, and she sat heavily while he checked her bandages. Blood had soaked through, dark and worrying. We need to find a healer, he said. This wound's deep. No healers, no villages. Not until we're far enough north that word won't travel back. Lyra, I'm serious, Kael. The moment we show up somewhere, people will talk. Luna Alira, stripped of her title, running from her own king. Serena will hear about it within days, and she'll send hunters. We can't stop until we're past the border clans, deep enough into neutral territory that her reach doesn't extend. You won't make it that far without proper treatment. Then I'll die trying. Better than dying in some village because we got careless." Kael's expression was grim, but he nodded. "Always were too stubborn for your own good. Learn from the best." They rested for an hour, Alira dozing fitfully while Kael kept watch. When she woke, the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of blood and fire. How fitting. They rode through the night, following old hunting trails that Kael knew from his days as a border scout. The landscape grew rougher, more wild, civilization falling away until there was just forest and mountain and the endless dark. Somewhere around midnight, Alira's fever spiked. She knew because the world started tilting sideways, because the trees began to blur and merge, because Kael's voice sounded like it was coming from underwater. "Stay with me," he was saying. "Just a few more miles. There's a safe house, old rebel outpost from the border wars. We can hole up there, treat that wound properly." Alira tried to respond, but her tongue felt thick and useless. The darkness at the edges of her vision was spreading, creeping inward. The last thing she remembered was sliding off her horse, the ground rushing up to meet her, and Kael's arms catching her before everything went black. Book. She woke to firelight and the smell of herbs. Her side was a mass of burning pain, and when she tried to move, a firm hand pressed her back down. "Don't," a voice said. "Not Kael's. Female. Older." Alira forced her eyes to focus and saw a woman with silver-streaked hair and knowing eyes watching her from across the small room. "Who are you?" "Someone who patches up fools who ride themselves half to death rather than accept help. Your friend brought you here 3 days ago, more dead than alive." 3 days. Alira's mind reeled. She'd lost 3 days to fever and unconsciousness. "Where's Kael?" "Getting supplies. He'll be back soon." The woman moved closer, checking the bandages on Alira's side with practiced efficiency. "You're Luna Alira, aren't you? The one King Darius cast aside for that Veil woman? News traveled fast, apparently. I'm not Luna anymore. Just Alira." The woman smiled, sharp and knowing. "Names and titles are just words. What matters is who you are when everything's been stripped away." "Who are you, girl?" Alira met her eyes, and for the first time since this nightmare began, she felt something clarify inside her. "I'm the one who's going to make them all pay." "Good. Then you'll live. The ones who give up die. The ones who turn rage into purpose survive. Who are you?" The woman sat back, shadows playing across her weathered face. "Name's Vara. I run a network up here in the borderlands. Information, safe passage, the occasional revolution. When your friend showed up with you bleeding out, I figured you were worth saving. Anybody who makes Darius that nervous must be doing something right." "He's not nervous." "Oh, he is. Word is he's got scouts out looking for you, quiet-like, through back channels. Wants to make sure you're actually gone, not gathering forces or planning something stupid." "And am I? Planning something stupid?" Vera's smile widened. "I certainly hope so, because I've been waiting 20 years for someone to challenge that bastard properly. Might as well be you." Outside, Alira heard horses approaching, Kael's voice greeting someone, then his footsteps coming toward the safe house. He entered carrying supplies, relief flooding his face when he saw Alira awake. "Thank the ancestors. I thought we'd lost you. Takes more than a stab wound and a 3-day fever to kill me." "Don't tempt fate," Vera said dryly. "You came closer than you think." Kael set down the supplies and knelt beside Alira's bedroll. "We need to talk about what happens next. Vera's people have been feeding me information. Serena's already consolidating power, and Matthias Vale's troops are moving into position along the northern border, just like you predicted. How long until Darius realizes he's been played?" Vera snorted. "Could be months. Could be years. Men drunk on power are the last to see the knife coming for their back." Alira pushed herself upright despite the pain, despite Kael's protests. "If we're going to stop this, we need allies. Real ones, not just safe houses and information networks. What did you have in mind?" "The Western clans. They've never submitted fully to Darius's rule. They might be willing to back a challenge to his authority, especially if we can prove Serena's a threat to everyone, not just us." "You'd need proof," Kael said. "Real proof, not just our word against hers." "Then we get proof. We go back. Not to Black Ridge. We'd be dead before we reached the gates. But to the southern territories, to Serena's home ground.
We find evidence of what she did to Cathin, evidence that even Darius can't ignore. That's suicide, Kael said flatly. Her father controls that entire region. Then we'll have to be very careful. Vara was watching her with something like admiration. You know this is a long shot, right? Even if you get proof, even if you turn the clans against Darius, you're still one woman against a king and his armies. I've been one woman against impossible odds before. I'm still here. Fair point? Alira looked between them, saw the doubt and concern, but also the willingness to follow her into this madness. I need you both to understand something, she said quietly. This isn't about winning Darius back. That's over. Dead. I accepted that the moment he chose her over honor. This is about making sure that when the kingdom falls, and it will fall if Serena's not stopped, it doesn't take innocent people with it. This is about protecting something bigger than my wounded pride. And if Darius dies in the process, Kael asked, if stopping Serena means destroying him too? Alira felt something hard and cold settle in her chest, something that would have horrified the woman she'd been a week ago. Then that's what it takes, she said. I loved him once, but the man I loved is already gone. What's left is just a king who sold his soul for power. And I won't sacrifice this kingdom to save someone who doesn't want to be saved. The words felt like poison coming out, like she was killing the last soft part of herself. But maybe that was necessary. Maybe to survive what was coming, she needed to become exactly what Darius had accused her of being too weak to be. Ruthless, calculating, willing to do whatever it took. The irony wasn't lost on her. He'd wanted a Luna who could make hard choices, who could prioritize power over sentiment. He was about to get one. Just not the one he'd chosen. The journey south took 2 weeks of hard riding through territories that grew increasingly hostile. Vera's network provided safe houses and intelligence, but the closer they got to Vale lands, the thinner those protections became. Alira's wound healed slowly, leaving a scar that pulled with each breath, a permanent reminder of Serena's blade and Darius's betrayal. They traveled in darkness mostly, avoiding main roads and staying clear of settlements where questions might be asked. Kael had connections from his border scout days, old allies who owed favors or shared grudges against the current regime. One by one, they gathered pieces of the puzzle. A merchant who'd seen Serena's brother disposing of blood-stained clothing the night Cathin disappeared. A stable hand who'd prepared horses for a midnight ride that was never officially logged. A seamstress who'd mended torn fabric that matched what Cathin had been wearing his last day alive. Individual threads that meant nothing alone but woven together formed a damning tapestry. The problem was getting someone to care. The Southern Territories were loyal to House Vale, and Serena was their golden daughter, their path to greater power through her bonding to the king. Accusing her of murder without ironclad proof would get them killed before they could speak 3 words. So they needed more than testimony. They needed physical evidence. A body, preferably. Though after 3 years, that seemed unlikely. We're missing something, Alira said one night as they camped in the ruins of an old watchtower. There has to be someone who knows where Cathin ended up. Someone close enough to Serena to be involved, but not loyal enough to keep quiet forever. Kael poked at their small fire, his expression thoughtful. Her brother, Marcus. He was the one actually seen disposing of evidence, but he's not going to talk. He's next in line to inherit if something happens to Serena. What about servants? Someone who cleaned up after them, who might have seen more than they were supposed to. Already tried. Anyone who worked in that household during that time period is either dead, disappeared, or too terrified to speak. Alira stared into the flames, her mind racing. There's a concept in investigation that applies whether you're tracking a killer or hunting prey. People leave traces. Always. No matter how careful they are, something gets left behind. A witness they didn't know was watching. A piece of evidence they thought was destroyed. The trick is finding the thread they missed and pulling until everything unravels. What about Cathin's family? She asked suddenly. Did they ever push for an investigation? His parents were dead. He had a sister, though, younger. She made noise at first, demanded answers, but she was just a girl with no power or connections. Eventually, she disappeared too. Disappeared or went into hiding? Kael's eyes sharpened. You think she's still alive? If I were her, watching my brother vanish and the woman responsible marry a king, I'd run. I'd hide. But I wouldn't stop looking for justice. I'd just wait for the right moment. That's a lot of assumptions. I've been that girl, Kael. Powerless, Watching people with influence get away with everything. You don't forget that rage. You don't let it go. You bury it and wait for your chance. So where would she hide? Somewhere Serena's influence doesn't reach. Somewhere she could watch and gather information without being found. They stared at each other as the same thought occurred to them both. The border monasteries, Kael said. Neutral ground. No allegiance to any territory. And they take in refugees, no questions asked. How many are in this region? 3 within a day's ride. If she's in one of them, we'll find her. The first monastery was a dead end. The monks were polite but firm. They didn't discuss their residence with outsiders. The second was abandoned, victims of the same border conflicts that had ravaged so much of this region. The third sat high on a cliff overlooking a valley, ancient stone walls wrapped in morning mist. Alira and Kael approached on foot, having left their horses at the base of the trail. A young monk met them at the gate, his expression wary. "We don't have much to offer travelers," he said. "Food and water, a place to rest, but we can't—" "We're looking for someone," Alira interrupted. "A woman, mid-20s now, would have arrived about 3 years ago, probably terrified and possibly injured." The monk's expression shuddered. "I can't discuss our residence. Her name was Lyra Reeves. Her brother was murdered by Serena Vale." The change in the monk's face was immediate and dramatic. His eyes widened, then darted toward the main building as if checking whether anyone had overheard. "You need to leave," he said, his voice dropping to an urgent whisper. "Right now. If she knows you're here asking questions—" "So she is here." "I didn't say that. You didn't have to. Please, we're not here to hurt her. We just need her testimony. Proof of what Serena did." "Why?" The monk's voice was bitter. "So you can get yourselves killed too? Serena Vale is untouchable. She's Luna now. You can't fight that kind of power." "Watch me," Alira said flatly. "I've already lost everything to that woman. The only question is whether I lose it for nothing or whether I take her down with me." The monk studied her face for a long moment, whatever he saw there apparently satisfying some internal criteria. "Wait here." He disappeared into the monastery, leaving them standing in the courtyard. Kael's hand rested on his knife, ready for betrayal or violence or both. When the monk returned, he wasn't alone. The woman with him was small, dark-haired, with eyes that had seen too much suffering for someone so young. She moved like prey, constantly checking her surroundings, ready to bolt at the first sign of danger. "Lyra?" Alira asked gently. The woman's eyes locked on her, recognition flickering across her features. "You're Luna Alira. I saw you once at a regional gathering before everything. Not Luna anymore. Just Alira now. Why are you here?" "Because Serena took something from both of us, and I want to make sure she pays for it." Lyra's laugh was harsh, broken. "You're 3 years too late. I tried. I screamed and raged and demanded investigation. No one cared. My brother was nobody important, and Serena was Lord Vale's daughter. The case was closed before it even opened." "I know," Alira said. "I know what it's like to be powerless while the guilty walk free. But things have changed. Serena made a mistake when she came after me. Because unlike your brother, I have resources. I have allies. And I have nothing left to lose." Lyra's eyes were wet but fierce. "What do you need?" "Everything you know, every detail about Cathin's disappearance, and anything you might have found in the years since." "I can do better than that," Lyra said, her voice trembling with barely contained emotion. "I can show you where they buried him." The grave was in a forest 2 hours' ride from the Vale estate, marked by nothing except Lyra's memory and a distinctive rock formation. She'd followed Serena and Marcus that night 3 years ago, watched from hiding as they dumped her brother's body in a shallow hole and covered it with stones and earth. "I wanted to dig him up," she said as they stood over the site. "Give him a proper burial, but I was afraid if I did, they'd know someone had been watching. So I left him here and ran." Her voice broke on the last word, and Alira felt an echo of her own pain reflected in this stranger's grief. They were both women who'd loved men who were taken from them. The methods might have been different, but the loss was the same. "We're going to dig him up now," Alira said quietly. "And we're going to make sure everyone knows what happened to him." It took them 3 hours of hard digging to reach the remains. Time and nature had done their work, but the bones were unmistakably human, and the skull showed signs of trauma inconsistent with accident or natural death. Murdered, Kyle said grimly, examining the fracture patterns. Blunt force, probably from behind. Lyra was crying silently, her hands pressed to her mouth. Elira put an arm around her shoulders, this girl she barely knew but understood completely.
"We'll make this right," she promised. "I swear to you." "How?" Lyra asked. "Even with this, even with proof, who's going to believe us over Luna Serena? Then we make it impossible not to believe. We bring this to someone who can't be bought or intimidated, someone whose word carries weight even Darius can't ignore."
"Who?" Elira met Kael's eyes. "Elder Marcus. He performed the bonding ceremony. He's traditional, honorable, and he's never liked political manipulation. If we present him with undeniable evidence of murder, he'll have to act on it. And if he doesn't, then we take it public. Bring Cathan's remains to the capital, lay them at the steps of the Great Hall, and let everyone see what their new Luna really is. There's a particular kind of determination that comes from having nothing left to lose. It's different from the calculated strategy of someone protecting their position or the aggressive ambition of someone seeking power. It's cleaner, somehow, purer. When you've already lost everything that mattered, when you've been stripped down to nothing but your convictions and your rage, you become dangerous in ways that people who still have something to protect can never match. Because you'll take risks they won't. You'll sacrifice things they can't. You'll walk into fire without hesitation because burning alive doesn't scare you anymore. Not when you're already in hell. They wrapped Cathan's remains carefully, reverently. Lyra spoke words over her brother, final farewells she'd never gotten to say. Then they began the journey back north, carrying their proof and their fury in equal measure. The trip back was faster, more direct. They weren't sneaking anymore. Weren't hiding. Elira had decided that stealth and caution had gotten her exactly nowhere, and it was time for a different approach. They rode straight through Vale territory in broad daylight, Cathan's remains secured on a pack horse, making no attempt to conceal what they carried or where they were going. Word spread ahead of them like wildfire. The disgraced former Luna riding north with a corpse and murder accusations. Within 2 days, they had followers, people who'd lost family members to Serena's ambition, people who'd been silenced or threatened, people who'd waited years for someone to finally challenge House Vale's stranglehold on power. By the time they reached the border between Vale lands and neutral territory, there were 50 riders behind them, a ragged army of the wronged and the angry, all looking to Elira like she was their salvation. She hadn't asked for this, hadn't planned it, but she couldn't turn them away either. At the border, they were met by a contingent of royal guards bearing Darius's colors. The captain rode forward, his face grim. "Luna Elira, I have orders to escort you to Blackridge Keep. King Darius wishes to speak with you." "Not Luna," Elira corrected. "And I'll come to Blackridge, but on my terms. I have evidence of criminal activity that needs to be presented to the council. The king's orders were specific. You're to come immediately, alone. I'm not coming alone, and I'm not coming unarmed. Either escort all of us or get out of my way." The captain's hand moved to his sword. "Those aren't the options I was given. Then you have a choice to make. Try to arrest me and fight through 50 very angry people who've been waiting years for justice. Or ride back to your king and tell him Luna Elira is coming home, and she's bringing the truth with her." The standoff lasted 30 seconds that felt like hours. Then the captain nodded slowly. "I'll inform the king, but don't expect a warm welcome. I stopped expecting anything from Darius weeks ago." The guard contingent fell in around them, not quite prisoners, but definitely not free. They rode the final day to Blackridge in tense silence, the castle growing larger on the horizon with each mile. Elira's heart was hammering, her palms slick with sweat despite the cool air. She was riding back to the place that had exiled her, carrying evidence that would either vindicate her or get her killed. Probably both. Kale rode beside her, his expression unreadable. "You ready for this?" "No, but I'm doing it anyway. That's generally how the important things go." As they approached the gates, Elira could see crowds gathering. Word had spread about her return, and it seemed like half the kingdom had turned out to watch what happened next. The gates opened, and they rode into the courtyard where she'd trained, where she'd laughed with Kael, where she'd fallen in love with a man who'd turned out to be a stranger. Darius was waiting at the top of the steps, Serena at his side. He looked older than Elira remembered, the weight of the crown pressing down visibly on his shoulders. Serena looked triumphant, her smile sharp and satisfied. Elira dismounted, gestured for the others to do the same. Lyra helped carry Cathin's wrapped remains, and together they walked toward the steps. The crowd had gone silent, hundreds of eyes watching this confrontation. "Darius," Elira said, her voice carrying across the courtyard, "I've come to present evidence to the council. Evidence of murder committed by your Luna." "These are lies," Serena said immediately. "Desperate fabrications from a woman who can't accept..." "Then you won't mind if we let Elder Marcus examine the evidence and make his own determination." Darius's expression was unreadable. "What evidence?" Elira nodded to Lyra, who stepped forward and carefully unwrapped the remains. The crowd gasped. Several people turned away, but Elira kept her eyes on Darius, watching his face as he saw the skull, the broken bones, the physical proof of what his Luna had done. "This is Cathin Reeves," Elira said, "Serena's former fiancé. The man who supposedly ran away 3 years ago. Except he didn't run. He was murdered, beaten to death, and buried in an unmarked grave in the forest outside the Vale estate." "You can't prove that," Serena said, but her voice had lost some of its confidence. "Actually, we can. We have a witness who saw you and your brother dispose of the body. We have testimony from servants about blood-stained clothes and midnight rides. And we have the remains themselves, which any physician can examine to confirm cause of death." Darius looked at Serena, and for the first time Elira saw doubt in his eyes. "Is this true?" "Of course not," Serena said. "This is clearly a setup. She probably killed someone herself just to frame me. I've been in hiding in the borderlands for weeks," Elira said flatly. "When exactly would I have had time to murder someone and let them decompose for 3 years?" Darius was silent, his jaw working, his hands clenched at his sides. "Elder Marcus," Elira called, "you're the highest authority on traditional law in this kingdom. I formally request a tribunal to examine this evidence and determine the truth of these accusations." The old man stepped forward from where he'd been standing with the other council members. His face was grave as he approached the remains, as he listened to Lyra's testimony, as he examined the documentation Kael had gathered. Finally, he turned to Darius. "By traditional law, these accusations are serious enough to warrant investigation. Until such investigation is complete, the accused should be held in custody to prevent flight or tampering with evidence." "She's Luna," Darius said. "She has immunity." "Immunity doesn't extend to murder," Marcus said firmly. "Not even for a Luna." The crowd was murmuring now, the sound building like an approaching storm. Elira could see the calculation in Darius's eyes, could see him weighing his options. Protect Serena and look complicit in murder, or allow the investigation and risk losing his alliance with House Vale. It was the kind of impossible choice that revealed what someone truly valued. "Very well," Darius said slowly. "Serena will submit to questioning, but this will be handled internally by the council, with full discretion, not turned into a public spectacle." "Too late for that," Elira said. "Half the kingdom is watching." "You wanted ruthless? You wanted a Luna who'd do anything for power? Well, you got one. And now everyone gets to see exactly what that looks like." Serena's composure finally cracked. She turned to Darius, her voice sharp with panic. "You can't seriously be considering this. I'm your mate, your Luna. You swore to protect me." "I swore to protect the kingdom," Darius said, and something in his tone made Elira's chest tighten, because it was the voice of the man she'd fallen in love with, the one who'd promised to always put duty first, even when it hurt. "If these accusations are false, the investigation will prove it. But if they're true..." "They're not true," Serena insisted. "This is political manipulation. Can't you see that?" "What I see is a body," Darius said. "What I see is evidence that needs to be examined. Guards, escort Luna Serena to secure quarters until the tribunal can be convened." "You're making a mistake," Serena hissed as the guards approached. "A fatal one. Is that a threat?" "It's a promise. You chose me over her. You bonded with me. You can't just change your mind now because she shows up with some convenient bones. Watch me." The guards took Serena's arms, and she fought them, her composure shattering completely into rage and violence. It took 4 men to subdue her, and even then she was screaming threats and accusations as they dragged her away. The courtyard erupted in chaos, nobles shouting over each other, the crowd pressing forward for a better view. Through it all, Illyra stood perfectly still, watching Darius, waiting for him to look at her. When he finally did, his expression was haunted. "We need to talk," he said. "Privately. I think we're past private conversations. Please, just give me 10 minutes. Against every instinct, against Kael's warning look, Illyra nodded. 10 minutes. He led her to the same small chamber where they'd had their last real conversation. Weeks ago, when she'd still hoped something could be salvaged. The room felt smaller now, suffocating with memory and regret. Darius stood with his back to her, staring out the window. "I didn't know," he said quietly. "About Cathin. She told me he'd left her, that he couldn't handle her ambition. I believed her. You wanted to believe her. There's a difference. Maybe. Or maybe I was so desperate for the alliance her father offered that I didn't ask the questions I should have. Why tell me this now? Why not just let the tribunal do its work? Because I owe you honesty. Finally. After everything." He turned to face her, and the exhaustion in his eyes was devastating. "I made a mistake," he said, "choosing her over you. I told myself it was strategic, necessary, the hard choice a king had to make, but the truth is I was afraid. Of what? Of how much I loved you, of how completely I'd given you my heart. You had power over me, Illyra, real power, the kind that terrified me because if I lost you, if something happened to you, I didn't think I'd survive it, so you pushed me away first, made sure I couldn't hurt you by hurting me instead. It sounds insane when you say it like that. It is insane and cruel, and it destroyed us both. I know. I've known since the moment you walked out of that ceremony. I just couldn't admit it. Couldn't let myself believe I'd made such a catastrophic mistake." Illyra wanted to feel triumph at this admission, wanted satisfaction that he finally understood what he'd thrown away, but all she felt was empty, tired, done. "What do you want from me, Darius? Forgiveness? Understanding? Permission to feel bad about your choices? I want to know if there's any way back from this. If I dissolved the bond with Serena, if I made you Luna again." "No." The word was flat, final. Darius flinched as if she'd struck him. "Illyra, you had your chance, multiple chances, and every time you chose power over me, over us. I'm not interested in being someone's second choice or their backup plan when the first one doesn't work out. I love you. You loved the idea of me, the version that made you feel like a better man. But the real me, the one who challenged you and questioned your decisions and refused to be controlled, you threw her away the first time she became inconvenient. That's not fair. Life isn't fair. You taught me that when you stripped my title and banished me from my own home." Darius moved closer, and she could see tears in his eyes, actual tears from a man she'd never seen cry. "Tell me how to fix this. Please, I'll do anything. You can't fix it. Some things, once broken, don't go back together. You can try to glue the pieces, but the cracks always show, and every time you look at them, you remember how they got there. So that's it? We're just done? We've been done since the moment you let Serena use that blade in a formal challenge and called it a setup instead of cheating. That's when I knew the man I loved was gone." He reached for her hand and she let him take it, felt his fingers trembling against hers. "I was wrong," he said. "About everything. About what makes a strong Luna. About what I needed. About sacrificing love for power. I was wrong, I know. But knowing doesn't change what happened, doesn't erase the pain or rebuild the trust. And it definitely doesn't make me want to go back to being the woman who believed in your promises." She pulled her hand away, stepped back. "The tribunal will examine the evidence. If it proves what I think it will, Serena will be found guilty of murder. What you do with that information, whether you honor traditional law or try to protect your alliance, that's your choice. But I won't be here to watch it." "You're leaving again?" "I'm leaving permanently this time. Going west to the clans who've offered me sanctuary. Maybe I'll rebuild there. Maybe I'll start something new. But I'm done with Blackridge. Done with you." The words felt like knives coming out, but they were necessary. Clean cuts that would finally sever what was left between them. Darius looked like he wanted to argue, to beg, to somehow change her mind, but instead he just nodded slowly. "I understand. And for what it's worth, I'm sorry.
Genuinely, deeply sorry for every moment of pain I caused you. I know, but sorry doesn't fix anything. It just means you finally understand what you did. She walked to the door, paused with her hand on the handle. One more thing, she said without turning around. When the truth about Serena comes out, when you realize just how thoroughly she played you, don't make the mistake of thinking you were innocent in this. You chose her knowing she was dangerous. You just thought you could control the danger and aim it at your enemies. Remember that when it turns on you. Then she walked out, leaving him alone with his regrets and his crumbling kingdom. The tribunal convened the next morning in the great hall, every seat filled, people standing shoulder to shoulder along the walls. This was history in the making, and no one wanted to miss it. Elira sat in the witness section with Kael and Lyra, watching as Elder Marcus called the proceedings to order. Serena was brought in under guard, her hands bound, her usual composure replaced with barely controlled fury. She glared at Elira with such venom that several people nearby actually shifted away. The evidence was presented methodically. The remains, the witness testimony, the financial records showing payoffs, the timeline that placed Serena and her brother at the scene. Serena's defense was weak, full of accusations and deflections, but short on actual counter-evidence. Her lawyer argued that the investigation was politically motivated, that Elira had manufactured everything out of jealousy and revenge. But the bones didn't lie. The fracture patterns didn't lie. And when the physician testified that Catherine Reeves had died from blunt force trauma consistent with murder, the hall went deathly silent. Elder Marcus consulted with the other judges for 20 minutes that felt like hours. Then he stood, his face grave. This tribunal finds that the evidence presented is credible and substantive. The remains have been identified as Catherine Reeves through dental records and personal effects found with the body. The cause of death has been determined to be homicide, and the testimony of witnesses, combined with physical evidence, places the accused at the scene of the crime during the relevant time frame. He paused, looking directly at Serena. Luna Serena Vale, this tribunal finds you guilty of murder. By traditional law, the penalty is death by combat or exile. As you are bonded to our king, the final determination of sentence falls to him. All eyes turned to Darius, who sat at the head table looking like he'd aged a decade in a day. Serena was staring at him, her expression a mixture of disbelief and calculation. "You can't let them do this," she said. "I'm your Luna, your mate. You bonded with me. You murdered an innocent man," Darius said quietly. "Lied to me about it. Used me to escape justice. It was necessary. He was going to expose my father's dealings, ruin everything we'd built. I did what had to be done. You killed someone because he inconvenienced you. I survived. That's what you said you wanted, someone ruthless enough to make hard choices. Not like this, never like this." He stood, and the hall fell silent. "The bond between myself and Serena Vale is hereby dissolved. She is stripped of her title as Luna and will be exiled to the neutral territories, forbidden from ever returning to this kingdom or any allied lands." "Exile," Serena spat. "How merciful. Too afraid to actually execute me because you're worried about my father's reaction. Your father will be informed that any retaliation for the lawful consequences of your actions will be considered an act of war. You're making enemies you can't afford, Darius. I'm righting wrongs I should never have allowed. Guards, remove her." As they dragged Serena toward the door, she wrenched herself free for one moment, turned back to face the hall. "This isn't over," she screamed. "None of you understand what's coming, what forces are already in motion. You think you've won, but you've just started a war you can't possibly win." Then the guards had her again, and she was gone, her threats echoing in the sudden silence. Darius looked at Elira across the hall, and she saw the question in his eyes. But she had no answers for him, no comfort to offer, no reassurance that everything would somehow work out, because Serena's final words had the ring of truth to them. This might have been a victory, but it felt like the opening move of something larger, something darker. And Elira had the terrible certainty that before this was over, everyone in this hall was going to bleed. Shikit. That night, Elira prepared to leave Blackridge for the final time. Her belongings were minimal. She'd learned to travel light, to not attach herself to possessions when survival meant staying mobile. Kael was coordinating with the Western clans, arranging sanctuary and safe passage. Lyra had decided to come with them,
having nowhere else to go and no desire to return to the Vale territories. As Alira finished packing, there was a knock on her door. She opened it to find Lord Garrett, his expression troubled. "A word, Luna?" "Just Alira," she reminded him gently. "But yes, come in." He entered, looking around the sparse chamber with something like sadness. "The council wants you to stay," he said. "Take back your position as Luna. The bond with Serena has been dissolved, and there's strong support for reinstating you. Darius approves this? He proposed it. Says you were right about everything, that he needs you. And what do you think?" Garrett was quiet for a moment. "I think this kingdom is heading toward a crisis. Matthias Vale isn't going to accept his daughter's exile quietly. He's already pulling his troops back, already making noise about broken alliances and betrayed trust. So you need me to help clean up the mess. We need a Luna who has the strength and the wisdom to navigate what's coming. You proved you have both." "I also proved that I'm not willing to compromise my principles for political convenience. That hasn't changed. Maybe that's exactly what we need right now. Someone who won't bend." Alira looked at this man who'd been one of her few allies, who'd stood with her when it cost him. "I appreciate the offer. Truly. But I can't go back to being Darius's Luna. That bond is broken in ways that can't be repaired. And staying here, trying to pretend otherwise, would poison everything. Even if it means the kingdom falls? The kingdom won't fall because I leave. It might fall because the people who run it have forgotten that power without honor is just tyranny with better branding." Garrett smiled sadly. "You would have made a remarkable queen." "I was a remarkable queen. For 3 years. Now I'm going to be something else. Haven't figured out what yet, but it'll be on my own terms." After he left, Alira stood at the window one last time, looking out over Blackridge. The castle that had been her home and her prison. The place where she'd found love and lost everything. Tomorrow she'd ride west. Tomorrow she'd start over. But tonight, she was just a woman saying goodbye to the life she'd fought for and the man who'd thrown it all away. Morning. Dawn came too fast and too slow. Alira met Kael and Lyra in the courtyard where their horses waited. A small crowd had gathered, servants mostly, people who'd served alongside her, who'd seen her rise from nothing. Mira was there, crying openly. "Safe travels, my lady. And thank you for showing us that common blood doesn't mean common worth." Alira hugged her, this girl who'd been loyal when loyalty was dangerous. "Be strong," she whispered, "and don't let anyone tell you you're less than you are." She mounted her horse, ready to ride out, when Darius appeared at the top of the steps. He looked terrible. Hadn't slept, clearly. Maybe hadn't slept in days. "Alira, wait!" She stayed mounted but didn't move closer. "What is it?" He came down the steps, stopped a few feet from her horse. "I know you won't stay. I understand why. But before you go, I need to tell you something. Then tell me. The Western clans are mobilizing. We've had reports of unusual troop movements, alliances forming between groups that have historically been enemies. And there's been contact between them and Matthias Vale. You think they're planning a coordinated attack? I think Serena's exile triggered something that was already being planned. And when it comes, we won't be ready. That sounds like a problem for the king and his advisors." Darius's expression was pained. "Alira, I know I have no right to ask anything of you, but people are going to die. Innocent people caught in the middle of a war they didn't start. So stop it. Use diplomacy. That's what kings are supposed to do. Diplomacy requires leverage. Right now, I have none. The Western clans don't fear me. They don't respect me. But you, they respect. You survived their trials, earned their acknowledgement. If you spoke to them, if you negotiated on behalf of the kingdom, now you want me to save your kingdom after you threw me out of it? I'm asking you to save people who had nothing to do with my mistakes. Children, families, the same people you fought for when you were Luna. There's a particular cruelty in asking someone to save the thing that destroyed them, in demanding they put themselves at risk for people who stood by and watched them suffer. It would be easier to say no, to ride away and let Darius face the consequences of his choices alone. But Alira had never been someone who could turn away from suffering just because it was convenient. That capacity for empathy, for caring even when it hurt, it was both her greatest strength and her most painful weakness. "I'll think about it," she said finally. "But I'm not promising anything, and if I do help, it's for them, not for you. I understand." Do you? Because I need you to really understand, Darius. We're done. Whatever happens from here, whether I stay or go, whether I help or walk away, we're done. There's no going back, no reconciliation, no second chance at what we had. His face crumpled with grief so raw it was almost obscene to witness. I know, he said hoarsely, and I'll spend the rest of my life regretting that I threw away the best thing that ever happened to me. Good. Because that regret is all you get to keep of us. She turned her horse toward the gate, Kyle and Lyra falling in beside her. Behind them, Black Ridge Keep rose against the morning sky, beautiful and deadly, and fading into memory with each step. At the gate, Alira paused, looked back one final time at the castle, at Darius still standing in the courtyard watching her leave. And then she rode through, into the unknown, toward a future that was terrifying and free in equal measure. The western land spread before them, wild and untamed. Somewhere out there, armies were gathering. Alliances were forming. War was coming whether she wanted it or not. The question was whether she'd face it as a peacemaker or a warrior. As someone trying to save what was left of the kingdom she'd loved, or someone finally letting it burn. Alira didn't know the answer yet, but she knew that whatever choice she made, it would be hers alone. No one else's agenda, no one else's ambition, just Alira Thorne, former Luna, survivor, woman who'd been broken and had chosen to rebuild herself into something new, something dangerous, something unstoppable. The horizon beckoned, and she rode toward it without looking back again. Behind her, Blackridge's bells began to toll. A warning of approaching danger, a call to arms, the sound of an empire beginning to crack. And ahead, past the mountains and the borderlands, past the territories she'd left behind, smoke rose in dark columns against the sky. The western clans weren't just mobilizing, they were already burning. The smoke on the horizon grew thicker as they rode west, and by midday the smell of burning villages reached them on the wind. Alira pushed her horse harder, her heart hammering against her ribs with a dread she couldn't name. This wasn't random raiding. This was systematic destruction, the kind that came from organized military force with clear objectives. When they crested the ridge overlooking the border settlement of Thornhaven, the full scope of the devastation became visible. The village was gone, not just damaged or raided, completely erased. Buildings reduced to smoking foundations, fields scorched black, bodies lying in the streets where they'd fallen. And in the center of it all, a banner flying in colors Alira recognized immediately. House Vale. Matthias didn't waste time, Kyle said grimly. This is retaliation for Serena's exile. This is genocide, Alira corrected, her voice hollow. He's sending a message that anyone who stands against House Vale will be obliterated. Lyra had gone pale, her hands trembling on her reins. My brother's justice cost all these lives. No, Alira said sharply. Your brother's murder cost these lives. Serena's choice to kill him, Matthias's choice to protect her. Darius's choice to bind himself to their corruption, those choices led here. Not your pursuit of truth, but the weight of it sat heavy in Alira's chest nonetheless. She'd pushed for the tribunal knowing there would be consequences, had believed that justice mattered more than political convenience, and now she was staring at the price innocent people had paid for her convictions. There's a cruel mathematics to leadership that no one talks about in the songs and stories. Every choice you make has a cost, and sometimes that cost is measured in lives you'll never meet, in villages you'll never visit, in children who'll never grow old enough to understand why they had to die. The hardest part isn't making the choice, it's living with yourself afterward, carrying the weight of those deaths, and not letting it crush you into paralysis or drive you into recklessness. It's understanding that sometimes there are no good options, only less terrible ones, and you still have to choose. We need to get to the clan holdings, Alira said. Warn them this is coming. Maybe there's still time to evacuate, to get people to safety before Matthias's forces arrive. And if there's not, Kyle asked, if we're already too late, then we fight, because I'm done running. The Stormwind clan held the largest settlement in the Western Territories, a fortified town built into the side of a mountain with natural defensive advantages and a population of nearly 3,000. Their chieftain, Rokan Stormwind, had been one of the few who'd acknowledged Alira's claim as Luna during her initial rise to power. He'd respected her survival story, her refusal to back down from challenges. Now she rode into his territory carrying news of approaching annihilation. The clan guards recognized her immediately, and within an hour she was standing in Rokan's hall, a massive stone chamber lined with weapons and battle trophies from centuries of conflict. Rokan himself was a giant of a man, scarred and graying, but still radiating the kind of power that came from decades of leading warriors. He listened to Alira's report without interruption, his expression growing darker with each word. "How many troops does Matthias have?" he asked when she finished. "Estimates put it at 5,000, Kale said. "Professional soldiers, well-armed, experienced in coordinated assault. And we have maybe 1,500 fighters across all the Western clans, if we can convince them to unite." Rokan's jaw tightened. "Those aren't good odds." "No. But sitting here waiting to be slaughtered isn't much of a strategy either." "You're suggesting we attack first? Take the fight to them?" "I'm suggesting we do what Darius should have done months ago, form real alliances, not political conveniences. The Western clans have always been fractured, fighting each other over territory and resources. But if Matthias succeeds here, if he destroys you, he won't stop. He'll keep pushing, keep conquering, until he controls everything from the mountains to the sea." Rokan studied her face. "And what's your stake in this, Alira? You're not Luna anymore. You could ride north, disappear into neutral territory, let the rest of us kill each other over kingdoms and pride. I could. Probably should. But I've spent too many years watching people suffer while leaders play political games. I'm tired of it. And maybe if we can stop Matthias here, prove that united clans can stand against organized military power, we create something better than what came before." "You're talking about revolution. I'm talking about survival. Call it whatever makes you comfortable." Rokan laughed, a harsh sound like grinding stone. "You've got fire, girl. Always did. That's why I supported you when the others thought you were just Darius's pretty mistake. I was never his mistake. He was mine." "Fair enough. So, what's your plan?" Alira moved to the large map spread across Rokan's war table, her mind already working through terrain and tactics. Matthias's forces are moving west in 3 columns, burning everything as they advance. They're trying to terrorize us into submission, make us too afraid to fight back. But that strategy requires keeping those columns spread out, maintaining a wide front to cover maximum territory. "Which makes them vulnerable to concentrated attack," Kael said, seeing where she was going. "If we can hit one column hard enough, fast enough, we eliminate a third of their force before they can regroup." Rokan leaned over the map. "The central column is moving through the Blackwood Pass. Narrow terrain, limited mobility. If we could bottleneck them there, we'd need every fighter from every clan," Alira interrupted, "and we'd need them coordinated, following a unified command structure. Can you make that happen? The Western clans don't follow anyone. We barely tolerate each other. Then make them understand that pride is a luxury we can't afford right now. Either we stand together or we die separately. Those are the only options." Rokan's expression was thoughtful, calculating. "You'd lead this? Coordinate the defense?" "I'd advise. You'd lead. These are your people, your territory. They'll follow you in ways they never would an outsider." "And Darius? What about Blackridge's forces? Are they coming to help?" Alira's expression hardened. "I don't know. And I'm not waiting to find out. If Darius sends reinforcements, we'll use them. If he doesn't, we fight anyway. You really are done with him, completely." Rokan nodded slowly. "Then we're agreed. I'll send riders to the other clans, call a war council, but Alira, even if everyone agrees, even if we execute this perfectly, a lot of people are going to die. I know, but at least they'll die fighting instead of burning in their homes." Dick. The war council convened 2 days later in a clearing that had historically served as neutral ground between clans. 11 chieftains came, representing every major settlement in the Western territories. Some Alira knew by reputation. Others were strangers, their faces hard with suspicion and barely concealed hostility. Rokan opened the proceedings, laying out the threat in stark terms. Matthias Vele's forces, the burned villages, the approaching columns, the choice between unified defense or individual annihilation. "And why should we trust her?" one chieftain demanded, pointing at Alira. "She's Darius's cast-off. For all we know, this is a trap, a way to get us all gathered in one place so Blackridge can finish us."
If Darius wanted you dead, Elira said coldly, he'd have done it years ago when you were all still fighting each other over scraps. I'm here because Matthias Vale is a threat to everyone, and I'm one of the few people who's actually fought him politically and won. You didn't win, another chieftain said. You got exiled. I survived, which is more than you'll do if you keep arguing while an army marches toward your homes. The chieftain bristled, but before he could respond, an older woman stood. Elira recognized her as Mara Ironwood, leader of the northern clan, someone with a reputation for brutal pragmatism. The girl's right, Mara said. We can argue about trust and politics after we're not facing extinction. Right now we need a plan, so let's hear it. Elira moved to the map they'd laid out on a makeshift table, pointing to the Blackwood Pass. Matthias's central column will reach here in 4 days. It's his largest force, roughly 2,000 soldiers. The pass is narrow with high walls on both sides. Perfect ambush terrain. We don't have 2,000 fighters, someone objected. We don't need 2,000. We need 500 archers on the ridges and another 300 in close combat squads to finish anyone who survives the initial volley. That's suicide. Even with the terrain advantage, we'd be outnumbered 3-1. Yes. Which is why we need to make them think we have more. We need decoys, diversions, anything that makes Matthias's commander hesitate and slow his advance through the pass. Kale stepped forward. I can coordinate the archer placements. I know this terrain, know the sight lines. We maximize coverage, minimize exposure. And the close combat squads? Roken asked. I'll lead them, Elira said. We hit fast and brutal, target their command structure, create chaos. The goal isn't to win a pitched battle, it's to break their formation and force a retreat. The chieftains exchanged glances, silent communications passing between them. Finally, Mara spoke again. If we do this, if we commit our fighters to this ambush, we're betting everything on one engagement. If it fails, our clans will be defenseless. If you don't do this, Matthias destroys you one settlement at a time. This way, at least you're choosing how you fight. Another long silence. Then, one by one, the chieftains began to nod. We're with you, Roken said. All of us. But understand this, Elira. If you're wrong, if this plan fails, our people's blood is on your hands. It already is. All I can do is make sure their deaths aren't meaningless. The next 4 days were a blur of preparation. Fighters poured into the staging area near Blackwood Pass, a ragtag army of clan warriors who'd never fought together, who barely trusted each other, who had to be forged into something resembling a coordinated force in less time than it took to properly train a single unit. Elira worked alongside Kael and the chieftains, running drill after drill, coordinating signals, establishing fallback positions. At night, she barely slept, her mind racing through scenarios and contingencies, looking for the fatal flaw in her plan that would get everyone killed. On the third night, Lyra found her sitting alone on a ridge overlooking the pass, staring at the stars. You should rest, the younger woman said gently. Tomorrow's going to be brutal. Can't. Every time I close my eyes, I see the bodies at Thornhaven, see what's coming if we fail. Lyra sat beside her, quiet for a moment. Do you think we can win? Honestly, I don't know. The terrain's in our favor, and surprise is worth 10 times our actual numbers. But Matthias's soldiers are professionals. They've trained for this. Most of our fighters are farmers and hunters who know how to handle weapons, but have never been in real battle. So we're probably going to lose. Probably. But there's a chance. A real chance. And that's more than most people get. Lyra was quiet again, then spoke softly. I used to hate you, you know, when I first heard about you being made Luna. I thought you were just another noble playing at power, someone who'd never known real suffering. And now? Now I think you're the bravest person I've ever met. Because you keep choosing to fight even when walking away would be easier, even when fighting might get you killed. Elira felt her throat tighten. I'm not brave. I'm just too stubborn to quit. Maybe that's what bravery is. Not the absence of fear, but being afraid and doing it anyway. Down in the camp, someone started singing. An old battle song, one Elira recognized from her childhood in the outer villages. Others joined in, rough voices harmonizing in the darkness, the sound carrying across the pass like a promise or a prayer. Elira closed her eyes and let the music wash over her, let it fill the hollow places fear had carved out. Tomorrow, they'd fight. Tomorrow, people would die. But tonight, They were alive, united, singing into the darkness like their voices alone could hold back the coming storm. Attack.
The day of the ambush dawned cold and clear, the kind of perfect weather that felt obscene given what was about to happen. Illyra stood with the close combat squad, 300 fighters armed with short swords and axes, positioned in concealed positions along the pass floor. Above them, Kyle commanded 500 archers spread across the ridges, invisible among the rocks and sparse vegetation. And somewhere to the south, Matthias Vale's central column was marching toward them, confident and unstoppable. Until they weren't. The first scouts appeared around midday, advance riders checking the pass for threats. They saw nothing amiss, just an empty canyon, harmless and open. They signaled the all clear and rode back to the main column. 30 minutes later, the army entered the pass. 2,000 soldiers in tight formation, their armor gleaming, their banners proud. They moved with the casual confidence of men who'd never been seriously challenged, who believed their superior numbers and training made them invincible. Illyra watched them come, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might crack her ribs. Beside her, warriors were breathing hard, some praying silently, some just staring at the approaching force with wide eyes. "Hold," she whispered. "Not yet. Let them commit fully to the pass." The army kept coming, the canyon filling with soldiers, until nearly 3/4 of their force was boxed in by the high walls. Illyra raised her hand, waiting for the perfect moment. The moment when retreat would be as difficult as advance. The moment when surprise would be absolute. Then she dropped her hand. The signal arrow shot into the sky, bright red against the blue, and hell erupted. 500 arrows flew from the ridges in coordinated volleys, a rain of death that fell on soldiers who had nowhere to hide. Men screamed, fell, trampled each other trying to escape. Officers shouted orders that were lost in the chaos. Second volley. Third. The archers were merciless, systematic, turning the pass floor into a killing field. And then Illyra was charging, leading her squad out of concealment, hitting the disorganized soldiers while they were still reeling from the arrow barrage. It wasn't combat, it was slaughter. Brutal, efficient, necessary. Illyra's blade found flesh again and again, her movements automatic, divorced from conscious thought. She'd trained for this, practiced killing since she was barely old enough to hold a weapon. But training and reality were different things, and the smell of blood, the sound of dying men, the weight of taking life after life, that was something no amount of preparation could make easy. A soldier came at her, sword raised, and she ducked under his swing, drove her blade up through his ribs, felt the hot spray of blood across her face, pulled the weapon free, spun, blocked another attack, countered with a slash that opened the attacker's throat. Around her, clan warriors were fighting with desperate ferocity. They were outnumbered, outmatched in training, but they had rage and terror and the knowledge that losing meant watching their families burn. The battle, if it could even be called that, lasted maybe 20 minutes. Then the surviving Vale soldiers were retreating, running back the way they'd come, leaving their dead and wounded behind. Illyra stood in the center of the carnage, breathing hard, covered in blood and mud and other people's deaths. Around her, warriors were cheering, celebrating their victory. But all she felt was hollow. There's something profoundly alienating about violence, even necessary violence. It changes you in ways that can't be undone. Every life you take, even in righteous combat, even in clear self-defense, costs you something. A piece of your humanity, maybe, or just your belief that the world operates on principles of fairness and justice. You become someone who knows, deep in your bones, that survival sometimes requires becoming a monster. And you have to decide whether you can live with that knowledge or whether it destroys you from the inside out. "Casualties," she called out, her voice hoarse. "Get me a count." Roken appeared beside her, his face grim. 87 dead on our side, maybe twice that wounded, but we killed at least 600 of theirs and sent the rest running. "It's not enough," Illyra said. "Matthias still has 4,000 soldiers spread across his other 2 columns. When word reaches them about what happened here, they'll regroup, coordinate, come at us with everything they have. So what do? We don't give them time to regroup. We hit the western column tonight while they're still scattered, then the eastern column tomorrow. Keep them off balance, keep them bleeding, until either they withdraw or we've whittled their numbers down to something we can actually fight in open combat. You're talking about a week of constant fighting. Our warriors won't last. Then we find more warriors. We recruit from every settlement, arm everyone who can hold a weapon. This isn't about military strategy anymore, Rokan. This is about survival." He looked at her for a long moment, something like awe in his expression. "You know you're describing total war, turning the entire Western Territory into a battlefield. Matthias already did that when he started burning villages. I'm just making sure we fight back instead of dying quietly." Tak. For 6 days, the Western Territories burned with constant combat. Alira's forces, because that's what they'd become, her forces, struck fast and brutal, hitting Matthias's columns before they could consolidate, forcing them into defensive positions, bleeding them with constant harassment. It worked. Barely. Matthias's troops were professional, but they were also far from their supply lines, fighting in hostile territory against an enemy that refused to engage in the kind of pitched battle they were trained for. On the 7th day, exhausted scouts brought word that Matthias himself had arrived with reinforcements. 2,000 fresh soldiers, well-rested and ready for vengeance. And behind them, flying Blackridge colors, another force of equal size. Darius had finally sent help. The two armies met in a valley that would later be called the Field of Ash, a name earned from the scorched earth tactics both sides had employed. Alira stood at the head of her ragged army, barely 3,000 fighters who'd survived the week of constant combat, many wounded, all exhausted. Across the field, Matthias Vale sat on his horse, imposing and untouchable in full battle armor, and beside him, looking somehow smaller than Alira remembered, was Darius. They rode forward under a parley flag, stopping 50 yards from Alira's position. She walked out to meet them alone, ignoring Kael's protests. Matthias spoke first, his voice carrying across the distance. "You've cost me a lot of soldiers, girl, a lot of gold, a lot of pride. I'm impressed. And now I'm going to kill you." "You're welcome to try," Alira said. "Though I should warn you, everyone else who's underestimated me has regretted it." Darius finally spoke, his voice strained. "Matthias, this can still be resolved diplomatically. Withdraw your forces, accept Serena's exile as lawful consequence of her actions, and we can negotiate reparations." "There will be no negotiations," Matthias snarled. "Your tribunal convicted my daughter based on manufactured evidence. You humiliated my house. And now you'll pay for it in blood and territory." "The evidence wasn't manufactured," Alira said. "Your daughter is a murderer. That's fact, not politics. My daughter is a survivor in a world that crushes the weak. She did what was necessary. She killed an innocent man because he threatened her ambitions. If that's your definition of necessary, then we have nothing to discuss." Matthias's eyes were cold, calculating. "You know you can't win this. Even with Blackridge's forces, you're outnumbered. I could end this in an hour. Maybe. But it'll cost you. Every warrior here knows what you did to Thornhaven, knows what you'll do to their families if they surrender. So they'll fight, they'll die. But they'll take so many of your soldiers with them that even if you win, you'll be too weak to hold the territory, and then the other kingdoms will move in, carve up what's left, and House Vale will be a footnote in history. The mathematics of total war. Brutal, accurate." Matthias's jaw tightened. "What are you proposing? Single combat?" "You and me. Winner takes all. Your forces withdraw if I win. My forces stand down if you win. That's insane. It's efficient. And it gives your soldiers a chance to go home alive." Matthias laughed. "You think you can beat me? I've been training in combat since before you were born." "Probably not, but I've been surviving since before I could walk. We'll see which one matters more." Darius was staring at her like she'd lost her mind. "Alira, don't do this. This isn't necessary." "Actually, it is. Because one way or another, this ends today. I'm tired, Darius. Tired of fighting. Tired of watching people die for political games. So let's settle this the old way. Blood and honor and no armies to hide behind." Matthias studied her face, clearly trying to determine if she was serious or suicidal. "Single combat," he said finally. "Traditional rules. Fight until one yields or dies, and all forces honor the outcome." "Agreed." "Then prepare yourself, girl, because I'm going to make an example of you that'll be remembered for generations." Alira smiled, cold and sharp. "That's what everyone says, right up until I prove them wrong." They fought in the center of the valley, two figures surrounded by thousands of watching warriors. Matthias was bigger, stronger, more technically skilled. He moved like someone who'd spent decades perfecting the art of killing. But Elira was faster, meaner, willing to fight dirty in ways that honorable combat training never prepared you for. The first exchange was cautious, both of them testing range and reaction time. Matthias attacked with textbook precision, strikes designed to overwhelm through superior technique. Elira dodged, countered, went for vulnerabilities his armor exposed. They circled each other, trading blows that would have killed lesser fighters. Blood appeared on both of them, Elira's shoulder, Matthias's thigh. The combat intensified. Matthias was trying to end it quickly, using his strength advantage to batter through her defense. But Elira had learned long ago that you didn't beat stronger opponents by matching their strength. You beat them by making them exhaust themselves, by staying alive until their advantages became liabilities. She danced away from his heavy swings, let him chase her, forced him to work harder for every strike. His breathing grew labored, his movements slower. And then Elira saw her opening. Matthias overcommitted on a downward strike, his weight too far forward. She stepped inside his guard, drove her blade up under his breastplate, felt it punch through mail and flesh. He staggered back, shock written across his face. She'd actually hurt him, seriously hurt him, but he wasn't done. With a roar of rage and pain, he lunged forward, caught her with a backhand strike that sent her flying, her weapon spinning away. Elira hit the ground hard, tasted blood, felt her ribs scream in protest. Matthias advanced, his sword raised for the killing blow despite the wound in his side. "This is where you die," he said. Elira's hand found a rock, sharp-edged and heavy. As Matthias brought his sword down, she rolled, came up swinging, drove the rock into his wounded side with everything she had left. He screamed, dropped his sword, clutched at the injury, and Elira was there, her hands finding his throat, squeezing with desperate strength. They went down together, Matthias trying to throw her off, Elira holding on with the grim determination of someone who'd survived too much to die here. His struggles grew weaker. His face turned purple. And finally, he went still. Elira released him, rolled away, lay on the ground breathing in ragged gasps while the world spun around her. Silence. Complete and absolute silence from thousands of watching warriors. Then, slowly, the cheering started. First from the Western clans, then, grudgingly, from Matthias's own soldiers who understood what single combat meant, what honor demanded. Elira pushed herself to her feet, swaying, covered in blood and mud and bruises. She looked at Matthias's body, this man who'd brought so much death in the name of his daughter's wounded pride, and she felt nothing, no triumph, no satisfaction, just exhaustion and the knowledge that more people were alive because of what she'd just done. Darius was suddenly there, having run across the field, his hands hovering near her like he wanted to touch her, but didn't dare. "You won," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You actually won." "No," Elira said quietly. "I survived. There's a difference. Let me help you." "I don't need your help. I need your forces to make sure Matthias's army honors the terms and withdraws. Can you do that?" "Yes." "Of course." "But Elira..." "There's nothing else to say, Darius. We're done. This changes nothing between us." She walked away from him toward Rokan and the clan chiefs who were waiting with something like reverence in their eyes. Behind her, she heard Darius calling her name one more time. She didn't look back. The aftermath of war is always uglier than the combat itself. The wounded to treat, the dead to bury, the survivors to rebuild from rubble and ashes. Elira stayed in the Western Territories for 2 months, helping coordinate relief efforts, making sure Matthias's forces actually withdrew, negotiating the fragile peace that emerged from all that bloodshed. Darius sent letters. She didn't read them. He sent emissaries. She refused to meet with them. Finally, he came himself, riding into Rokan's territory alone except for 2 guards, looking older and more worn than Elira had ever seen him. She met him in the same hall where she'd first proposed the defense of Blackwood Pass, in the same place where she'd transformed from exile to war leader. "Thank you for seeing me," he said. "I'm seeing you, so you'll stop coming. Say what you need to say, then leave." Darius flinched at her tone but pressed on. "The Council wants to formally thank you for saving the Western Territories, for preventing what would have been a catastrophic war. They're proposing to restore your title, offer full honors. I don't want their thanks or their titles. Then what do you want? To be left alone. To rebuild something that isn't tainted by politics and betrayal and the memory of what we had. He moved closer, his expression desperate. We could rebuild together, start over. I've learned, Alara. Learned what matters, what real strength looks like. Give me one more chance to prove. No. The word was final, absolute. Darius's face crumpled. I love you. I've always loved you. I was just too much of a coward to choose that love over power. I know. And maybe in another life, in another world, that would be enough. But in this one, you made your choices. You threw away something precious because you thought you could always get it back. And now you're learning that some things, once broken, stay broken. So there's nothing I can do, nothing I can say. You can leave. You can let me build a life that doesn't revolve around forgiving you or trying to salvage what you destroyed. You can give me that much, at least. There's a particular kind of grief that comes from watching someone finally understand what they lost. It's different from anger or vindication. It's just sad. A recognition that two people who once fit together perfectly are now strangers wearing familiar faces, and no amount of longing can change that. Alara felt that sadness as she watched Darius realize she meant every word. That this really was goodbye. Not the dramatic temporary kind. The permanent one. I'll go, he said finally, his voice breaking. But I want you to know that you were the best thing that ever happened to me. And losing you was the worst mistake I'll ever make. I know, but that's your burden to carry, not mine. He left without another word, and Alara watched from the window as he mounted his horse and rode away, getting smaller and smaller until he disappeared beyond the ridge. And then finally, she allowed herself to cry, not for what they'd had. That was dead and buried and properly mourned, but for what they could have had, if he'd been brave enough to choose love over legacy. If she'd been wise enough to see the cracks before they shattered everything. The tears came hard and cleansing, washing away the last remnants of hope she hadn't realized she'd been carrying. When they finally stopped, she felt lighter. Empty, but lighter. Lyra found her there an hour later, still standing at the window, staring at nothing. He's really gone? Really gone? How do you feel? Alara considered the question. Free, she said finally. Sad and free and ready to be something other than Darius's Luna or his enemy. Just Alara, whoever that turns out to be. The Western clans are saying you should lead them. Officially. Be their queen. I'm not interested in being anyone's queen, but I'll help them build something better than what we had. A council of chiefs instead of one ruler. Shared power instead of concentrated. It won't be perfect, but maybe it'll be less fragile. Lyra smiled. You're still trying to save the world. Just my corner of it. That's all anyone can really do. 6 months later, Alara stood on the same ridge where she'd watched Thornhaven burn, but now the valley below showed signs of rebuilding. New structures rising from ash, fields replanted, people moving through the streets with purpose instead of fear. The Western territories had formed a coalition government. 11 clans represented equally in decision-making. It was messy and argumentative and inefficient, but it was theirs, built by consensus instead of conquest. Alara had declined any official position, but everyone knew she was the one holding the fragile alliance together. When disputes arose, they came to her. When threats emerged, they looked to her for strategy. She'd become something she'd never planned to be, a leader without title, respected not for bloodline or political marriage, but for what she'd survived and what she'd built from those ashes. Kyle approached from behind, his footsteps familiar enough that she didn't turn. Letter from Blackridge, he said. Marked urgent. Everything from Blackridge is marked urgent these days. What's Darius want now? It's not from Darius, it's from Garrett. He says the council's fracturing. Without a strong Luna to balance Darius's authority, the nobles are fragmentating into factions. He's asking if you'd consider... No, Alara interrupted. I'm not going back to save Darius from the consequences of his choices. Even if it means Blackridge falls into civil war, even then. The Western clans need me here, and I need to be somewhere that doesn't make me into something I hate. Kyle was quiet for a moment. You know people are going to keep asking, keep trying to pull you back into that world. Let them. I'll keep saying no. Eventually they'll understand. And if they don't, then I'll say it louder. She turned to face him, this man who'd stood beside her through everything, who'd never asked for anything except the chance to keep standing there.
"Thank you," she said, "for believing in me even when I didn't believe in myself." "Always," he said simply. "That's what family does." They stood together watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and crimson, and for the first time in longer than she could remember, Elira felt at peace. Not happy, exactly. The scars were too fresh for happiness, the losses too recent, but peace. The knowledge that she'd survived, that she'd fought for something that mattered, that she'd refused to let betrayal and heartbreak turn her into someone she despised. In the end, that was what real strength looked like. Not the ability to dominate or conquer, not the willingness to sacrifice principles for power, but the capacity to be broken and choose, consciously and deliberately, to rebuild yourself into something better than what you were. Darius had wanted a Luna who was ruthless enough to make hard choices. He'd gotten Serena, and it had destroyed him. But Elira had become something more valuable, someone who understood that the hardest choice was often choosing to remain human in a world that rewarded monsters. Someone who'd learned that you could be strong without being cruel, fierce without being heartless. She was no one's Luna now, no one's queen. She was just Elira Thorne, survivor, warrior, builder of new things from the wreckage of old. And that, she'd discovered, was enough. Sumchets. Years would pass before Elira saw Darius again. Blackridge endured its fracturing and emerged weaker but intact. The Western Coalition grew stronger, became a model that other territories began to study and emulate. Serena disappeared into the neutral lands, last seen heading toward the Eastern Kingdoms. Some said she was gathering forces for revenge. Others claimed she'd given up power entirely, become a hermit living off the land. Elira didn't particularly care either way. Serena was the past, and she'd spent too long being haunted by things that were over. When they finally met again, it was at a neutral gathering called to negotiate trade agreements between territories. Darius looked distinguished in a way that came with age and hard-won wisdom. The crown had weathered him but not broken him. He approached her during a break in negotiations, tentative and respectful. "Elira, you look well. So do you." They stood in awkward silence, two people who'd once known each other intimately, and now were strangers bound only by shared history. "I heard about the Coalition's success," Darius said, "what you've built out there. I'm proud of you. I didn't do it for your pride. I know, I just wanted you to hear it anyway." She studied his face, looking for the man she'd loved, finding only echoes and shadows. "Did you ever figure it out?" she asked. "What you were really afraid of?" "Loving someone more than power. Being vulnerable. Losing control. And now? Now I know that power without love is just isolation, but I learned that too late to matter." "It wasn't too late," Elira said gently. "It was just too late for us." "Is there someone else?" "I heard rumors." "There's me, finally, fully." "That's enough." He nodded, acceptance and regret mingling in his expression. "I'm glad you found peace, even if it wasn't with me. I'm glad you found wisdom, even if it cost us everything to get there." They parted without drama or tears or final proclamations. Just two people who'd once meant everything to each other, acknowledging that they'd both survived the wreckage and come out changed. As Elira walked away, she felt the last thread of what they'd been snapped cleanly. Not painful anymore, just complete. She returned to the Western Territories that night, to the home she'd built in Stormwind, to the life she'd constructed from determination and refusal to stay broken. Lyra was waiting with reports on the autumn harvest. Kale had questions about border patrols. Rokan wanted her input on a dispute between clans. Normal things, important things. Things that mattered because they were about building and protecting and creating something better. As Elira settled into the familiar rhythm of her work, she felt gratitude for the pain that had brought her here, for the betrayal that had forced her to discover who she was when everything was stripped away. She'd been Luna once, had worn a crown and ruled beside a king, but she'd become something more valuable in the end. She'd become herself, undiluted, uncompromised, unbreakable. And that, she knew with bone-deep certainty, was the only crown that really mattered, the only one that couldn't be taken away, the only one worth wearing.